Haere mai. Welcome to this ordinary meeting of Nelson City Council to hear submissions to the Waimea Community Dam proposal. I'll ask that you all stand for the opening prayer.
Almighty God, sovereign in all things, bless this city and its people. Guide us in local government each day that our decisions may be wise and just and magnify your holy name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Councillor Noonan. We are now ready to commence the agenda items, starting with the apologies. I've received an apology from Councillor Fulton and an apology for lateness from Councillor Skinner. Are there any other apologies? In that case, would somebody care to move? Thank you. That we accept the apologies. Moved by Councillor Courtney, seconded by Councillor McGurk. No debate. I will put that. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Order of business will be as set out on the agenda sheet. I'm not aware of any changes to the order of business at this stage. Should one arise during the course of the hearing, just in terms of the order of submissions, I'll update you as we go. We are, of course, live streaming this meeting, and I'll just remind everyone to please use their microphones. If you're coming to present your submission, then there is a button on the microphone that is talk, and when you press it, the red light will go on, and when you're finished your presentation, I just ask that you press talk again to turn the microphone off, and the red light will go off. We have some late items to the agenda, so we've received some further submissions after the agenda was published, and so we have a second resolution to accept the further late submissions, which is item 4, and I believe that will have been tabled. Is that correct, Pamela? We've got tabled items, so you'll have received one. Is this one here, which came out with your agenda, I believe, or with the agenda? After the agenda. So councillors, do you have this one here, which is dated the 6th of December, late items? That's the second resolution, so that's the new one. And then the back of your, or if you're on electronic, if you go to the back of your report from page 193, the large numbers, so 193, you'll find the submissions to Waimea Dam proposal late submissions. So today we need to pass resolutions to both accept the late submissions that came out earlier, plus the further late submissions, because what I'm prepared to do is receive, in my view, late submissions up until the day of the hearing, and so some have come subsequently. So we have two resolutions to attend to today, and I would ask that we do that now. So that's been moved by Councillor Barker, second by Councillor Walker. You happy to move both Councillor Walker and Councillor Barker Walker? Thank you very much. Pamela, are you happy that we do that in a group? Thank you. All right, in that case I will put the motion that we receive both groups of late submissions and the hearing report in relation to that. I'll put that. All those in favour? Aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Now we have a list of speakers that we're going to be confirmed today, and that's been tabled. So you'll have a sheet on your, I think, on front of you with the submissions, and you'll see that they have page numbers. Now the page numbers are not the big numbers on your agenda. For those of you on hard copy, they are the small numbers which start with the word page 1, so rather than just the number. So if you were running off the hard copy, you'd be starting on agenda page 10 to find the first one. So, any questions from the councillors? All right, everybody's ready. In that case, we'll commence the hearing process, and we'll invite our first submitter to join us, Mr. Dan Maguire. Welcome, Mr. Maguire. You'll find Mr. Maguire's submission on noted at page 1. Welcome, Mr. Maguire, and you are speaking on behalf of yourself, is that correct, or an organisation?
On behalf of myself.
Thank you. In that case, councillors, I just ask that you note that in relation to the submission, just for clarity, that Mr. Maguire is not speaking on behalf of the Residents Association or Nelson Grey Power. It's an individual submission.
Honourable Mayor, that's correct, but I want to point out that many of my colleagues in those organizations share the views that I'm going to express here. Honorable Mayor and members of the Council, relying primarily on property rates to fund incredibly expensive new infrastructure for TDC irrigators is not sustainable or fair for Nelson ratepayers. Local Government New Zealand noted in its recent report on Nelson Council that, quote, some staff and councillors appear to believe that it is acceptable to increase rates to beyond the affordable level for ratepayers on a fixed income, such as a pension. My own rates have increased 150% since 2006 when the current mayor came to council. Nelson already has some of the highest water rates in the country, and we have an abundance of water. Our leakage alone could supply Richmond. Council needs to focus on the $50 million in core infrastructure requirements for stormwater, sewerage, and footpaths that have been neglected while rates money was spent on tourism, entertainment, and art during the last 12 years. I would like to assure Council that my colleagues and I will remind the electorate just prior to the next local body elections which members of Council voted in favor of this $5 million politically motivated giveaway. We will work extremely hard to ensure that voters can identify you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Maguire. Any questions for Mr. Maguire? Councillor Courtney.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Dan. Thank you, Dan, for your submission this morning. Dan, that's a fairly hard-hitting submission, but I still think it's timely because we need to be reminded as your employee that, people out there are suffering from the burden of rates, no question about that. But how do I reconcile that with people that contact me and say, Mel, this dam is a no-brainer. Water is jobs. That's what they say to me. How do I reconcile that with your position?
I would find it very difficult to be in your position, but from my own point of view as a ratepayer, there's no question here that our own essential infrastructure that's been sadly neglected over the last years should receive the first priority. Don't forget, while you were away, that we ratepayers put out a huge amount of money for essential infrastructure in water, and we essentially resolved that problem, although much of the piping for the water has been sadly neglected and is leaking very badly, as I could show any councillor who'd like to take a tour. Yeah, I don't have any further comment.
Councillor McGurk, then Councillor Laurie.
Yeah, thanks, Dan, for your submission. You made the comment in your written submission, more money spent on the Arts Festival than a surge each year. What figures are you talking about?
After ticket sales and all that, Council still spends $600,000 on the Arts Festival. We spend $500,000 a year on sewerage.
Oh, okay.
Councillor Laurie.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thanks, Dan. You talked about supporting the dam being something that someone might do for reasons of political motivation. You talked about being politically motivated. Can you explain that? Because in a lot of ways I think the political thing to do would be to oppose the dam because people don't like having their rates put up. So can you explain what you meant?
Well, let me put it this way. I was once a National Party member, and during the last years, I've seen an awful lot of council policy coming out of the local National Party organization.
Any other questions for Mr. Maguire? In that case, thank you, Mr. Maguire, for presenting your submission.
Thank you,
Our
Mayor.
next submitter is Mr. Stephen Sutton. I'll invite Mr. Sutton to join the meeting.
Good morning.
Whenever you're ready.
I'll just wait for them to hand out a copy of what I've got to say. Okay, good morning. I'm Stephen Sutton. I support the Nelson City Council contributing $5 million to the Waimea Community Dam. Just a bit of my background. I have lived in an area just north of Champion Road for 46 years, an area the city likes to refer to as Nelson South, but I've always referred to it as Richmond North, having lived there all my life. Because of a change of land use in this area, we now farm boysenberries and apples at the end of Edens Road, which is the middle of the Waimea Plains. Because we have farmed in the plains for a number of years, I have been on the Waimea Committee from its start, some 15 years ago. I am not on the board of the Waimea Irrigators Limited. WIWAC was formed to come up with a solution to a problem of not enough water to meet demand on the plains. There have been no new water rights issued since 1996. The committee was made up of irrigators, TDC, NCC staff, Fish and Game and iwi. This was an interesting group, but we worked well together. The conclusion, after a lot of study, was an augmentation dam that puts water down the river in times of low flow would be the best and most cost-effective solution and best for the river. In my personal view is that the committee made one big mistake. We were grappling with the issue of how to fund this dam, and someone from the TDC came up with the idea of all ratepayers on the plains paying through the rating layer. What a great idea. This makes it cheaper for all of us on a per hectare basis. In my view, what a big mistake. And now we have a whole lot of people who don't think we need any water and are now opposed to the dam. This was the start of the anti-dam lobby. These people are just anti anything that has the word dam in it. They cannot see that this is the most cost-effective option. This will improve the flow. This will improve the flow of the river. This will improve the ecosystem of the river. With the TDC's new plan, without the dam, there isn't enough water to grow crops or for the TDC to supply its domestic and industrial users. All other options will cost irrigators and TDC more. I went to a TDC meeting on what their options were without a dam. This was for TDC water only. One cost as much money as the TDC are putting into the dam, but was only for 15 years supply, and after that they have to spend more money. All the rest will cost more, a lot more, and had no effect on river flow or health. But the anti-dam group can't see this. You cannot discuss this with them. All they see is no dam. Due to historical reasons, TDC have very good infrastructure for the area north of Champion Road and have supplied water to industry for a very long time. I do believe that if the dam is built, then the TDC will stop supplying this area, and so the NCC will have to supply infrastructure at its cost. I do not know the cost of this, but I do know pipes and pumps always cost lots of money. NCC just have renewed its roading supply, Sorry, I'll start again. NCC have just renewed its consent for its roading supply. I am very surprised it could do this unnotified. The water from the roading flows into the Waimea, and so the amount of water that NCC takes has an effect on the minimum flow of the Waimea, and so has an effect on all users in the Waimeas. I believe the Council has a responsibility to help fund this project, and I'm very happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton. Any questions for Mr. Sutton? No questions. The submission is very clear. So, Stephen, don't think that lack of questions is a lack of interest in your submission.
I'll see there is no questions. I would like to make one comment because I'm not sure a lot of you guys are aware, but so you know, so step rationing is starting in the Waimea Plains on Monday, so step rationing is 20%. If there was no dam, so that's what a lot of people don't understand, there is two sides to the TDC plan. If there is no dam, the new rationing steps are implemented. I believe as of Wednesday next week, it would be 50% rationing of all water users on the Waimea Plains. So that's what a lot of people do not understand.
So, Stephen, are you part of the dry weather task force?
I
All right. Perhaps I could ask you, could you explain how the dry weather task force operates?
I have been on the drive of a task force. I don't choose to go there
Right.
at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
So no questions?
Thanks, Stephen.
Okay.
Thank you. Our next submitter is Mr. Peter Sutton. And I'll invite Peter to join the meeting. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and I thank the Mayor and ladies and gentlemen of the Council for the ability to speak to my quite short submission. I haven't expanded it in written form because it's not, in effect, a technical matter that needs further explaining. I am not concerned with the result of the Council deciding to move a grant to the dam construction. I am very concerned at the process by which this was done. I believe the holding of closed workshops at which council officials and councillors listen to people who are making requests of you without any public supervision is against all provisions of natural justice. The Council is there as representatives of the people of Nelson to exclude public from workshops at which, in effect, decisions are made because immediately afterwards the proposed donation was announced, are to me completely at odds with what is required in the democratic process. The workshops are not covered by meetings, and as a result, apparently, no minutes are kept, no details of who was attending are kept, and so the public is prevented from using the Information Act to obtain details about the meeting, who was there, what was said. As a psychologist for much of my working life, I know the effect of a meeting with limited access to information, how decisions are made, often unconsciously. I know that there are people who are skilled in the construction of dams, people also who have vast ecological knowledge on river flows and the effect on the environment and wildlife. I can only assume that those people were not invited to the workshops. I think the process of holding closed workshops is completely against and contrary to, as I said, the need for natural justice. I think that the Council should, in fact, resolve to hold at least an equal number of workshops open to the public before any final decision is made on supporting the Waimea Dam. I know, as I say, from my psychological studies and experience, that a closed meeting which commits ratepayers to a significant sum of money is going to arouse and should arouse resentment and annoyance among the general public. I sincerely ask the Council, as I said, to conduct some open workshops with opponents as well as proponents of the Waimea Dam presenting their arguments, and with public present to hear what is said and to prompt further questioning. I don't want to take up the Council's time further, but I would suggest that closed workshops not be carried out in the future on decisions that are going to be contentious. I'm very happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton. Any questions for Mr. Sutton? No questions, Mr. Sutton. Thank you very much for your submission today.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next submission is from Mr. Richard, is it Schmuke or Schmuke?
Bob Schmuke.
Thank you, my apologies. Welcome to the meeting.
Thank you. My name is Bob Schmuke. I've been a ratepayer in Nelson since 1980, and in Tasman District Council at the same time, and our residents in Appleby since 2003 for 13 years, and still paying rates in the Tasman District. I've got just a couple of points about the dam, and I made a written submission to Nelson City Council and TDC. The first one is on usage. Right now, the water that comes down the Waimea River is used in the Waimea East scheme, that's bright water and lifestyle blocks, and for certain irrigators. There's nothing in the plan about infrastructure to take that water from the dam, if it becomes operational, to Richmond or any new subdivisions like the Richmond West one that's been proposed. So the idea that the Nelson City Council should get involved because we're going to get water from in Nelson South, I think is drawing a long bow. The second one is finance. 82.5 million is the estimate, but really it's unknown, and they have submissions in December, and the cost has still not been published. But the ratepayers will have to stand behind that, and that includes the debt that the WIL group is going to undertake. If they fail on that, the ratepayers of Tasman District will have to stand behind that. So right from the start, it's on a basis that is very shaky as far as I'm concerned financially. Anything over $3 million overruns, the ratepayers again will have to stand behind. So I can't see why we should contribute $5 million to a plan that's not even been properly published as far as finances. The WIL group needs 3,000 contributors. As of last month, they had somewhat short of 2,500, and there's no indication that they're going to increase that number before the February date. The water basically is too expensive for the irrigators to pay for and also pay off the debt. The environmental impact, which is being used as a red herring to have the ratepayers pay for the other ratepayers, this includes Motueka, Golden Bay, Murchison, the rest of the Waimea Plains, as far as the appearance of the Waimea River to have water going down it in summer times, or a minimum flow as taken at the Waimea Bridge. I was a landowner on the Appleby River, on the Waimea River in Appleby from 1980 to 1987 as a horticultural farm. And we had our own bore, which we had a maximum we could take of. We never did, because after the plants were established, you tended not to water them very much. The problem out there has been, from the 80s and 90s, is over-allocation. And that's a Tasman District Council responsibility. And they have over-allocated, and now they're in trouble, and they feel that the reason they need this dam is to sort out their mistake in the first place. All the lifestyle blocks that have 2,000 liter allotment, which they pay for on their rates bill every year, a lot of them now, they don't have the ability to increase those numbers of lifestyle blocks in the Appleby area because of the water situation, even though the scientific aspect of the aquifer is that there still is plenty of water out there. So the water that comes out of the dam will continue to go to Waimea East, other irrigators that take up the allotments that can use that water in the river, and the rest of it is just going to flow out to the sea. So there's no evidence that that water, that extra water that's going to flow down out of the dam into the sea, is going to replenish the aquifer in any meaningful manner. So I think that reason is just to give them an excuse to have the rest of the ratepayers and the TDC contribute. 2 years ago, when they had submissions, 3 or 4 places in the Tasman District, 90% of the submissions were against the dam. And that included some of the users, the irrigators out there. And I could name them because I was at one of those meetings. And yet, they immediately went back and put $25 million in their long-term plan for the dam. It was just absolute negating what they had been told at these meetings by the ratepayers. So my feeling is, and I don't think there'll be any difference in the numbers when they have the latest round of submissions, which I think they're trying to do this month before Christmas. I don't believe Nelson City Council has any business putting $5 million, and certainly no mandate from their ratepayers, who most of them don't pay attention to what's going on here. They have no mandate to put $5 million into this project, which a TDC may or may not be able to even get started because of the problems they've got at the site right now, or because of the number of irrigators that they can get signed up. If you want to see the TDC's ability to run a project, look at what's happening in Queen Street. It's only half done, and they're already $1 million over budget. And this is a TDC hallmark for projects they've done. I've watched it. I've seen it in Golden Bay. It's just the fallback is always, let's put the rates up and the ratepayer will take responsibility. In this case, the ratepayer is going to have a huge responsibility if things don't go correctly. And there's no one that I've talked to that believes There won't be an overrun on that dam. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Courtney.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Robert. Robert, don't you see anything positive in this development? Anything at all? I mean, I'm having communications from people that say to me, Mel, and they say it's a clean green development, that it's giving us water security and food security.
Who is it giving water security to?
No, just let me finish. Our question is coming.
Is there a question there?
Right, sorry.
Well, I mean, who are we providing water for, Mr. Courtney? Who exactly is getting the water that's going to come out of that dam? Can you tell me that?
I asked you a question, and now you're doing something, you're asking me one.
Oh,
I represent the people of Nelson,
yeah.
And I'm saying if you'd listened to me, but you were talking over me, if you'd listened to me, I said people were communicating with me and telling me that this was a clean, green construction that's being established, development that's being established out there, and it has things like food security and water security and jobs. And so I want to know, is there nothing positive in this development? Come on, it's $82 million.
Is that the question? Is there nothing positive?
That's right.
There is something positive in that any large construction undertaken by the government, or in this case, local government, will provide jobs and money for people doing it. You could take the bypass of Ruby Bay, Mapua. That put a lot of money into the construction industry in the Nelson, Tasman District area. But that doesn't necessarily mean that, because the government was involved in that one also, but that doesn't necessarily mean that this project is going to do the same. If you talk to people who are actually up there excavating now, you find that there are still a lot of problems, and they've had new requirements put onto them by the government environmental agencies about what they should do on the base of the dam and clearing out, and whether the base structure needs to be compacted with more clay than they originally thought, which is going to involve a lot more money. Sure, the two people who will benefit from this construction are the construction industry itself and the financiers. That's the only people that will benefit from this, because if it was such a good deal for the WIL group, they would have had no problem signing up for it. There are a lot of people who believe that the money charged to the WIL group per year for payback of the loans and for what they will get out of it for their crops, which mainly is the pip fruit industry, because there's no dairies really out there anymore. And the people who have grapes don't use it, and we were involved in a grape thing in a grape vineyard outside of Brightwater for 12 years, Lord Rutherford, as shareholders, and after the second year, we never used water, and it was right on the banks of the river. So, to answer your question, I don't think anybody will benefit except the construction industry and the financiers.
Councillor Delberg.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Hi, and thank you for your presentation. I liked your points. The one thing I'd ask is, you made a comment, there's no evidence water from the dam will replenish the aquifers.
That's correct.
So, where's the evidence that that won't happen? Because people are giving us evidence they think it will, and I appreciate your comments, so I'm putting it back to you. Where's your evidence that it won't happen?
In the past, every year since I've been here, and when we owned the horticultural property on the banks of the river, in the summertime, the river flow was very low and sometimes almost nothing. And of course, that was an accepted fact, and the whole industry and all the lifestyle people out there, all the residents that lived on the Waimea Plains accepted that, and that rationing was inevitable in the summer times. The aquifers that are underneath there are quite deep, and there was never any problem providing water for the households in the Waimea Plains in all those years that this has been involved. I can't see, and I've listened to presentations by the water group in Richmond, which had a series of meetings around the area about a month ago, and they had people who were expert in the dam construction, water, the water performance, I guess you could say, of what water does when it flows down the river. And that's a confined area going down the river, and most of the water that will be turned loose will flow down the river reasonably quickly and end up in the estuary in Nelson Bay. So to replenish the aquifer, you need the water coming down from rainfall and other tributaries and things that allow the water to seep into the aquifer. But from my understanding, and I'm certainly not an expert about it, is that just running water down that Waimea River, which is a confined area, doesn't do very much to replenish the aquifer.
Okay, thank
And there are
you.
a lot of people that think there's more than enough water in those aquifers to provide for the current requirements.
Thank you for the answer to the question. Thank you for coming in to present to us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next submitter is Mr. Lewis Tinson, and I'll invite Mr. Tinson to join us.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And I'll just go off my chosen topic a little bit and perhaps answer a question over here as to the evidence of what will and won't go in the aquifer. And I'd refer Councillor Dalberg. If Councillor Dalberg digs out the Tonkin and Taylor Phase 2 report, which I think is still on TDC website, if not, email me and I'll send you a copy, and looks at the peer review of that report by Dr. Vince Bidwell, he will see that Dr. Vince Bidwell questions whether supplementing the flow of the river under drought conditions would make any appreciable difference into the water volume going into the aquifer. I have tracked down Dr. Vince Bidwell and rang him. He doesn't want to get involved, probably for obvious reasons. However, I did ask him the question, Vince, did you ever get any more work after you wrote that peer review? And his answer was no. So I'm an engineer, I'm not a hydrologist, so I'll just leave it at that. But Councillor Dalberg is welcome to check that. What I did want to talk about, one thing, clearly I don't believe Nelson City Council should subsidise the Waimea Dam. Clearly it is fundamentally an irrigation project with partially dressed up in drag as an environmental project and partially subsidised by the taxpayer and largely subsidised by the TDC ratepayers. WAL say no, there is no ratepayer subsidy. That is nonsense. If it goes ahead, somewhere of the water that actually gets used, the irrigators in the future, in 100 years' time, will use about at least 80% of the water. The urban community will use somewhere around 20%. However, WAL are refusing to pick up any more than half the current projected costs. So therein is a subsidy. They will only be picking up 49% of the operational costs, but using 80% of the water. What sort of business levies its shareholders for its operating costs? I've never heard of one. We know that WAL will require the TDC ratepayers to underwrite their loan from CWAL, not only underwrite the principal, underwrite the interest repayments. CWAL has no confidence that WAL can even meet the interest repayments. And as you all know, WAL's liability as far as cost overruns is concerned is limited to $1.5 million. Cost overruns on a project like that could easily be 10, 20, 30 times that number. And so I don't think that Nelson City Council should be subsidising what is fundamentally an irrigation scheme. We've all read the reports from various economic experts that predict that if the dam is built, there will be $1 billion worth of benefits in the community over 20 years. If that is the case, then irrigators would be falling over themselves to buy shares in this irrigation scheme. Private equity funders would be falling over themselves to buy a share in this scheme. However, obviously that's not happening, so the irrigators are voting with their wallets. Now I'll come back to my submission. If Nelson City Council wants to spend $5 million on a water scheme, they'd be far better off to use a fraction of that money, maybe a third, to fix some of the leaks, which, as you all know, are enormous in this district and in TDC, and I'm giving them a tune-up as well. To that end, I'd refer you back to the Cameron Gibson Wells report of November 2014, where it states that the leaks in Nelson City Council are approximately 290 litres per day per connection, compared to Tauranga, which is an exemplar, I will admit, of 100 litres per day per connection. Nearly 3 times Tauranga. How does Tauranga do it? I don't know. Get somebody down here from Tauranga to tell you. And that if the losses in the Nelson City Council system could reduce to that observed in Tauranga, Nelson water production could be reduced by 1,400 megalitres per year, which is 3,800 cubic metres a day. Now, 3,800 cubic metres a day is a very interesting number because that's roughly what TDC is short of in order to avoid phase 3 restrictions for the urban community. So if you want to reduce your leaks, you could sell water to TDC. Now, I've just done some numbers here. Obviously, the people you should be considering selling it to as your own ratepayers, Alliance and NZA. Now, I'll refer you here to MWH Stantec report, which is appended to the TDC Full Council Agenda 14 June 2017, which has got the figures of consumption for NZA and Alliance and all the other industrial consumers. NZA and Alliance, their average consumption is over the year is about 1,000 cubic metres a day. Their peak consumption in summer, or the killing season, is 1,500 cubic metres a day. So if Nelson City Council could spend $1 million, $2 million, fix leaks to the tune of 1,500 metres a day, 1,500 cubic metres a day, which is less than half what Cameron Gibson Wells have recommended, then you could sell that water to NZA and Alliance and not have to spend a cent at the Tantra G, which your staff has flagged that if we sell more water, we've got to spend money at the Tantra G. Well, that's nonsense. All you've got to do is fix the leaks. Now, and then you've got to run some reticulation to NZA and Alliance. Okay, that might cost another couple of million. So let's say the whole project costs 4 million, 5 million, whatever. Let's say 5 million. There's your $5 million. Now, the revenue that you would generate from NZA and Alliance at $2 a cubic metre, which is less than TDC's retail, is $2,000 a day, $730,000 a year for an expenditure of $5 million, which is 14% per annum, no operating cost. Once you've got the pipe in, fix the leaks. Sweet, 14%. Can I have a share of that? Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Tinson? Councillor McGurk.
Just a quick question, through you, Madam Mayor. Thanks, Mr. Tinson, for your submission. In your written submission, refer to the Bentham report. Is that the Bentham report dated May 2017?
Yes. I haven't got a copy of that with me, but I believe that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
David Bentham, who was the independent expert on this.
That's right, the one who did the peer review.
Yes, that's right.
I just read that, well, so that's the report you're referring to?
Mm-hmm.
All right, that's fine, thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions? No other questions, Mr. Tinson. Thank you very much for coming in to present. Our next submitter is Mr. Malcolm Saunders, and I'll invite Mr. Saunders to join the meeting.
Well, good morning, councillors and Mayor. Once again, I'm in front of you to talk about the Waimea Community Dam. I'm coming from a little different aspect. I was a city councillor when we voted in favour of the Maitai Dam. Now that project way back in the late 70s had an estimate of around 9 million. At that point in time, the project got underway a little late, and I think it ended up around 10.5 million. Now the reason that that dam went through was to service, basically to service the fishing industry. It was Sealord, Tallies, Sandfords, they really needed an adequate water supply for their industries. That wasn't the only reason. It was to secure water for the Nelson City area, which was expanding rapidly with the industry that was going on, the freezing works, the packing houses, which were basically to help service people out in the Waimeas and the Tasman district. So it was a win-win situation in those days. Later, a water treatment plant was put in at Nelson City at quite a large cost. I think it was around 28 million. But included in that cost was the improvements of the water connections from the roading scheme through to the present water treatment plant up the brook area. So just a little bit of history there. There was a very good reason to put the Maitai Dam in. And I see the same scenario with the Waimea Community Dam. I'm a ratepayer of Richmond and Tasman. In my view, we need that facility to service the fruit bowl and the vegetable growing area of the Waimea Plains. You only need to look at that area and see the expansion that has been going on in the apple industry, the vegetable growing areas that have been expanded. It is quite illuminating on the aerial views that you can see that have been put in recently. So there's a very good reason for that people in New Zealand require good produce. The export divisions of those groups that are exporting, they require quality fruit and vegetables to be sent around the world, bringing in dollars for this whole area. Now, my view, we need to look ahead as to the complex area of how this water area or the water schemes are handled. And my submission outlines the fact that I believe we should have a combined water care services company set up by Nelson City Council and Tasman District Council, same scenario as the Port Company, the Airport Authority and several other joint facilities that both councils operate under. We need a council-controlled organisation to service that, to go out and get the funding from the government and other areas to stand the $84 million cost of this asset that will be there forever and a day. There are very good reasons that this dam should go ahead. That is my submission. There's just a couple of other things that have come through since I put my submission in. And I've put this submission in for the last 3 years, I may add, regularly every year and spoken to it. Lindsay McKenzie, the CEO at Tasman District Council, has come out in a press release recently about his resignation and mentioned the fact that he believed that the TDC should talk to Nelson City Council about a combined water care services company, which pleased me very much. So he's picked up on it, and I hope that the Nelson City Council can. The other aspect that I wanted to make a note about, the damming report on water quality in New Zealand that was released yesterday by the Minister, David Parker. We don't want to get into that situation here. We need people running the water supplies in this area. We need top-notch people to make sure that our quality of water exceeds all expectations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Saunders. A question from Councillor Laurie.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Mr Saunders. Have you swum in the Mai Tai River recently?
No, but I know what it is like.
So I was in there yesterday with my kids, and the sludge and the slime were awful. And we went quite a long way up the Mai Tai to avoid that sludge and slime. Now, I've been here for 20 years. People who have been here longer than me tell me that the river has never been the same since the dam went in. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I know there are problems with the Mai Tai supply, not the least is the mineral factors that have been mentioned. I don't know what the answer is in respect of the Mai Tai supply, but I do know that an adequate supply from the roading that has been agreed to helps the Nelson City have water.
Okay, so through the chair, you don't have any concerns that if we dam the river in Tasman that we might see the kind of degradation that we seem to have experienced in Nelson?
Not in that area where it's proposed for the dam to go.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr Saunders? Councillor Courtney.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Malcolm, for your submission. You only want to include TDC and Nelson City Council in this venture. You're eliminating the irrigators in the Waimea Plains. They are the main users. Why are you eliminating them? What's
Well,
the reasoning there?
it's not the fact that I'm eliminating them.
We're not including them.
Certainly, but the overall controlling authority would be the ratepayers. Water is owned by everybody, and by having the ratepayers represented by the councillors on the council-controlled organisation, same as the airport, those Waimea irrigators have a say through their councillors. That's the way I see it.
No other questions, Mr Saunders. Thank you very much for coming in. Our next submission is from Mr Richard Sullivan, and I understand Richard's got a PowerPoint presentation. Welcome, Mr Sullivan. Just get that PowerPoint ready to go. And I'm not sure whether are you familiar with the clicker down there? Thank you. When you're ready.
Thanks for the opportunity to speak. I'm an economist. I live in the Brook Valley. I've worked in forestry, agribusiness, financial markets, and I've led forecasting teams for the Reserve Bank and the Treasury. So my submission will be very economic focused. But if we go to the next slide. Oh, right.
Little gadget next to you there, and
Excellent.
Pamela will just come down and help you with that.
Thank you. Just press go.
Are we going to need to operate it manually up here?
Yeah, I've only got 3
Okay.
slides, so it should be all right.
That's fine, we'll work our way through that.
So what it'll show is the information that is part of what the council officers provided with the costings, and it gives idea of the costs of that Nelson will be up for if we go for the dam and if we don't. And basically, it says that you're not making a $5 million decision today. You're making a commitment for the difference between 25 million and 50 million. You're doubling the cost. It's $25 million to achieve your water supply. So there it is. So this is provided by the council, and it will be an extra commitment of $25 million over the next 10 years. So essentially you have two options to buy the same outcome, but one is double the price. As a former Treasury analyst, I would look at that and say, well, obviously you would expect council officers to recommend the cheaper option. But when it comes to spending other people's money, it seems normal criteria do not apply. David Hammond has suggested that actually the economic benefits is what swayed the recommendation. He's essentially saying that it's worth spending twice as much money to source a reliable and resilient water system to get the magic beans of future economic activity. The thing is, these beans aren't actually that magic. If you look at the economic benefits, they need to be looked closer. In my written submission, I outline a few details where I think the benefits are overstated and that potential costs have not been assessed at all. Just an example of the sort of overstatement that has been put out in the public, the media release from the City Council that's still on the website suggests that the benefits will be $665 million per year for the region. And that's absolutely outrageous. It's probably a typo, but the fact that it's remained on the website for 4 months just shows the worrying over-promotion of this project. The NZIER Economic Assessment Report is, well, quite comprehensive. One thing that I noticed was a complete lack of graphs. This is extremely unusual for an economic report. So I made one. If we go to the next one. So what we have here in the blue is the history of GDP growth in the Nelson Tasman area, and I've flatlined it from 2016 where the last data is, and that's 4.4 billion per year. The red is what we can expect if we just have our average growth rate of the past 15 years, which is a rather ordinary 2.6%, although we are supposed to think ordinary is extraordinary these days. That black area, it's an area, not a line, is the impact of the Waimea Dam. And all of that does add up to nearly $1 billion. It just shows that in relation to the size of the local economy, it's, the impact is minuscule. I mean, you can see a little bump while the construction activity goes underway, and then as we see the benefits to the orchardists and growers out in the Waimea Plains, it does get a little bit fatter, but really it's barely noticeable. And as an example, if you were able to lift average growth rates from 2.6 to 2.7, the red line would overtake the black area in less than 5 years and grow much faster. And it's not hard to think of other ways to improve growth rates by 0.1%. An easy one would be not raising rates by 0.5% to pay for the dam. So despite the constant overestimation of the benefits and the non-reporting of costs, it appears the economic benefit is pretty small, and we must remember that just about all of those benefits will accrue to orchard owners on the Waimea Plains. And even if jobs are created, these are jobs that no one wants. We're already having to import labour just to deal with the harvest that currently exists. So what I'm saying is this is an old school, think big type project. Belongs in the ages of dinosaurs, Muldoonism and former environment ministers. Nelson does need to think about a better model for future economic growth. So there are basically 3 ways to grow economic activity. You can do the things you're doing, but do more of them, which is basically what this dam is. Make more inputs available to increase output, and providing cheap water to the dam will achieve this. But that'll only give you what you've already got, a bigger version of the past. Now, as the world evolves, we need to align with the future, and that means doing things better. This is the area of dynamic innovation, and it unleashes the potential to improve the way we do things. For example, growing apples with a limited water supply will encourage research into better methods and the development of new varieties. Thus, we can grow without having to use more of our natural capital. And because we've enabled that human capital, we'll start to develop different activities and do better things. And this is where the real growth happens. It could be leveraging a comparative advantage that we've developed to develop drought-resistant varieties of all sorts of plants and become world leaders in horticulture. But we don't really know. And this is the problem. This is the unforeseeable future. It is uncertain, but it will be better if we put the right incentives in place. It's also the direction that the new government is heading, with its greater focus on natural, social and human capital, as opposed to just financial and physical capital. As a council, you have an opportunity to show that you want to put the incentives in the right place and be part of this better future. By not committing to this old way of thinking, we can have a better economic development path. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. A question from Councillor Delberg.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Sullivan. Thank you for your report. Very good. I like the numbers. My question to you would be, have you thought about the no dam and therefore the lack of investment in that region because of the risk of uncertainty of water? I.e., why would someone invest a couple of $1 million or more thinking that 1 in 3 years has got no water?
Well, that's a very pessimistic view of human activity. People will invest where they see opportunity. And if the only opportunity is to extract more water to create more apples, which New Zealand doesn't need, we export apples, we don't need more apples. The investment will not just sit in the bank. People will still look for profit. People look for opportunities. People want to make their lives better. The incentive of not having that cheap water will encourage people to look for better ways of doing things.
No, sorry, thanks for your answer. You kind of missed where I was heading. It's not a case of more water. It's a case of the certainty of the water, so their crop or whatever the development they're doing is actually protected. So if you've got an investment, you end up with no water, which we know right now they've got a lack out there at the moment. So if I was a business person, I'd be thinking that's a risk, that I could end up with a 95% chance of not having enough water and my investment could be lost. That would probably question most businessmen or women with a risk management problem.
It's most definitely, but business is risky and farming is very risky. I have a farm myself, but I do not ask the ratepayer or the taxpayer to provide me with certainty. I make decisions, and all business people make decisions, investing their own money, putting it at risk, and for that risk they expect a return. If you want certainty, you should expect no return.
Councillor, no, I'm going to move on now. Councillor Elbert, Councillor Rutledge.
Thank you. Was interested in the first chart you put up with the numbers with the two different scenarios, and certainly familiar with those. One thing that I believe does put a bit of weight onto the alternative source of water that we'd be able to access if we spent the full $50 million through the Waimea Dam is the argument around resilience, and if there was a major event, having the ability to draw water from the Maitai Dam, or if that was damaged beyond immediate repair, we've got an alternative source where we can supply the city from. What value would you attach to resilience of supply?
Well, it's high, but I believe there are alternative sources already, and probably less costly. And also, I mean, this is what you're asking is an actuarial question, which is far more maths than I'm capable of. But one thing we do know about people is they assign very high risk, very high weightings to high impact events with very low risk, and very low weighting to low impact events with very high risk. And I would suggest we do not overplay the resilience problem. I think there are other ways to improve the resilience of the system, and I do believe that the option that was presented, the no dam option, provides most of that.
Okay. There's no further questions. Thank you, Mr. Sullivan, for coming in to present and for your PowerPoint presentation. That will be available to councillors, so I'll make sure that's circulated. Thank you. Our next presenter is Mrs. Mary Ellen O'Connor, who will be joined by Mr. Brian Halstead. Welcome. Welcome, Mrs. O'Connor. I just want to check, you're presenting on behalf of Water Information Network Incorporated, is that correct?
Well, no,
I'll just ask you if you could just press the talk button as well.
Is that working now?
Yes, it
is.
is.
There we go.
Thank you.
No, the Water Information Network is a slightly different body from. I've been part of a group called Waimea Irrigators and Water Users. The names get fairly confusing. So I actually presented as an individual myself, but I am a member of Waimea Irrigators and Water Users, as is Mr. Brian Halstead here, who I've asked to come along with me today.
All right, so this is an individual submission.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks everybody. Can I ask a question first off? Did any councillors attend any of the Water Information Network meetings that were held around? Some of you did? Stuart, you did. Great. I think that's very interesting, really, because there was some very interesting presentations there. You'll be Peter Fraser, who's an ex-Treasury economist, who knows a lot about dams. He's made a real study of them. He was involved over the Ruataniwha one. There's Murray Dawson, who is he's a scientist really by training, and he knows all about the aquifers. And Mr. Brian Halstead, who comes at things from multi-pronged perspectives, as a land valuer, as both a grape grower and a pastoral farmer, and as an accountant himself. So between them, they present a fairly plausible alternative to this, what I have also termed in other people, this a relic of the Think Big era, is really what we've got here. So I won't completely read over my submission. I've outlined, I feel there's been a lot of misinformation around it. I guess by way of promotion of the dam, certain myths have been propagated. I've listed some of them there. The whole thing about we don't have enough water to meet the growing needs of our community. Well, I mean, I think we really do, and that in fact a lot of the water allocation is presently not being used, and so on and so on. I've gone through those. The weather is changing. In fact, the 2015 NIWA report to the TDC stated that Tasman District is to get 10 to 15% wetter by 2100. Maybe this summer may be a bit of an exception to that rule, but that's the NIWA prediction, and so on. But I'll just go on to talk a little bit more about the risks. I think the risks are the big thing, and they are heavy financial risks involved. The historical overrun cost of dams is 52%, and I think we're already seeing that in the originally quoted figures. For this dam, they have just kind of gone up exponentially as time's gone by. So councils run the considerable risk of finding themselves hijacked to enormous cost overrun. And yeah, economists are better at extrapolating all of that out than I am, but those figures are easy to do. The political risk is very much there. This idea of the CCO, under a CCO, general ratepayers become liable when costly problems arise. So I guess what I'd like to say to the Nelson City Council is, why would you go there? You know, what do you really see as any advantage to you? You're just wading into what is already very contested territory and putting your own ratepayers at risk. I think that's the major point I'd like to make. Why do it? Seismic, well, there's seismic reports which will say there is no seismic risk. On the other hand, it's very easy these days to get a report which comes up with the result that the people paying for the report want. You really need independent reports. The environmental stuff has been covered by a lot of people. There's a very close association. The yield per hectare required to pay both the upfront cost and the annual per hectare costs will force people into pip fruit, kiwi fruit and berry fruit are really the only things that will provide the yield per hectare sufficient to pay what is likely to be the ongoing per hectare in itself will lead to far higher nitrogen application, which of course goes into the aquifers, the creeks, the rivers, the estuary, and we've already got very worrying levels of nitrate concentration in groundwater. This is identified by the Nelson Medical Officer of Health some years ago, and continues to be the case. Cultural, well, as I say, I'm just repeating myself there really, that very few products will have the yield to pay. That will lead to a monoculture. There are alternatives, and I mean, what happened to user pays? Many proactive irrigators have already dug ponds. Bill Lynch and Herman Seyfried, to name but two. It's like your man here before said, you enter into a business. Well, you look those risks fair square in the face and you take them on. You don't try and force a council or all their ratepayers, because what we're talking about here is a few horticulturalists, about 27, that are real keen to see this one fly. The vast majority of irrigators and people with water consents simply do not require it, do not want it. A much cheaper proposal is the one based in Clover Road, which we might hear a little bit more about. Weirs and storage ponds have been proposed. Water collection tanks must be made compulsory, I think, for all new dwellings, for all new subdivisions, and greener horticultural practices, including less intensive planting and mulching of trees to hold. We've got away from that, what we just used to be just kind of ordinary practice. Now it's got to be called kind of green practice, but whatever term you use, that's what we need to be getting back to. So they're the points I'd really like to make. I can send to staff the link to Peter Fraser's address that he gave on the 31st October at Headingley Centre, which is very good from the economic perspective. He's not going beyond that, he's just talking about the economics of it. There's quite major kind of critical mass problems around it. It's too big for the area that's needed, and it's too small to be a viable irrigation scheme. He goes into these critical mass issues very well. The building costs are going to be horrific, and I don't know, how expensive does it need to get before the TDC says no? I don't know. That's an interesting question. One, Nick Patterson, dear departed, said that if it got to $450 to $500 per hectare per year, it was dead in the water. Well, it's already way beyond that, and it's still going on. So it's a very good question. The TDC ratepayers especially are going to be underwriting the two risks. If it goes over the 82 million, if it goes more than 85 million, TDC ratepayers pay for it. And who pays for all the spare water? Well, the Crown Irrigation Fund does in the interim, but if that doesn't get signed up, the TDC ratepayers are also up for that. So that's me. Thank you for listening.
Any questions for Mrs. O'Connor? No, there's no questions today. Thank you very much for your submission and coming in to talk with us today. Thank you.
Have I got any time flexibility there?
Not really. No, you've had well more than 5 minutes. So if there was any just final comment you wanted to make, it would be fine. But I think we're pretty much done. I think you've got a good submission there.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Our next submission is from Mr. Steve Cross, and I'll invite Mr. Cross to join us.
Good morning.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. You're familiar with our process, and I have on my timesheet. Everyone, by the way, just for the councillors, has been given 5 minutes to present. I am allowing slightly over that where I need to, but we're going to get a bit behind time if we go too far beyond that. Mr. Cross, welcome.
Good morning. I want to start today by protesting about the process, or rather lack of process, followed by Council on the proposal to provide $5 million of corporate welfare to Waimea Plains irrigators. The whole process has been secretive and lacking in transparency. At least 5 so-called workshops have been held where proponents of the project have spruiked their case in secret. From what limited information I've seen from these workshops, I'm not surprised that staff and project proponents have welcomed the lack of public scrutiny of their presentations, as they are full of bias, misinformation and spin. I've seen a cost analysis that was presented at one workshop that looks like it was done on the back of a fag packet, and it was so poor it had an addition mistake in the costings. As a one-time professional engineer, I am saddened that members of my past profession had participated in producing analysis in support of the dam, which is so obviously biased and partisan. An open and transparent process would have soon exposed the failings in the analysis presented to councillors. Any process which doesn't encourage contestable advice is, in my mind, a poor process. So secret has the process been that I've been denied copies of the notes from those meetings. I've also been denied copies of the presentations given at those meetings. I've been told that no record exists of who actually attended those workshops, a failing that is almost certainly in breach of the Public Records Act 2005, which states that every public office and local authority must create and maintain full and accurate records of its affairs in accordance with normal, prudent business practice. I'm not the only person who have concerns about the poor process that has been followed. I'm sure many of you know Ian McLennan, a very successful businessman who is experienced in governance and who was entrusted by this council to deliver on the Suta project. In his submission to the TDC, Mr McLennan states, "I strongly protest the TDC and NCC use of workshops which have selectively allowed scheme supporters rights of attendance and no public scrutiny of and input into the information being provided to the council members assembled. Past and current councillors have lamented to me privately that they are most uncomfortable and feel under duress, and they know they are being presented a very selective and cherry-picked view which house rules prevent them from seeking independent advice on or even discussing in detail." There is no doubt that the 5 workshops held have been instrumental in persuading councillors around this table to tax every ratepayer in Nelson the equivalent of $230 to help prop up an otherwise hopelessly uneconomic project. If you all fervently believe that you're doing God's work in gifting $5 million of other people's money towards this project, I hope you have the courage to do it by way of a rates increase, which would be around 8%, and thereby answer to Nelson ratepayers for the increase in rates. I think I know what Vera would have to say about this. Loading this cost onto debt is the coward's way out and is most unfair to future generations. In fact, I will go further and say I cannot see how there can be any possible reason for debt funding the proposed contribution. The dam company is being set up to be non-profit, so any share investment in it won't be for any benefit for future generations. There is no tangible asset being purchased, nor is there any obvious benefit for future generations of Nelson ratepayers, when Nelson already has enough water to supply me, my kids and my grandkids without any difficulty. There is no issue of intergenerational equity in this project. Any economic benefits, unlikely as they are, will accrue to the current generation. I don't think that doing the neighbourly thing is a good enough reason to burden future generations with debt. The best characterisation of your proposed expenditure is that of being an economic development grant, something that has always been treated as operational expenditure. It would be very creative accounting indeed to now characterise this as capital expenditure. I want to signal today that should a $5 million contribution be agreed and be debt funded, I will refer the matter to the Office of the Auditor General. There appear to be many reasons around this table why most of you support this proposal. I've heard the argument that by making a $5 million contribution to the dam, a capital expenditure of $3.2 million on extending a water supply pipeline to the Nelson South area will be avoided. The officer's report actually says may be avoided, and that has to be a very optimistic statement. Under the proposed arrangement, Alliance will pay around $350,000 more per annum for its water than a similar business within Nelson City would pay. Do you really think the Alliance managers are so stupid that they will tolerate this? The $3.2 million saving is fictional and should never have been put before you as some sort of benefit for the dam. Many of you have said that you support the dam because it will lead to improved water quality. I want to quote from a Cawthron report, September 2013. It's this one here, Implications of Different Minimum Flows in the Lower Waimea River. It talks about benthic cyanobacteria formidium, which is what forms black mats on riverbeds, and it's what presents a serious health risk to people and domestic animals. So we all know about this. Dogs in particular are attracted to the musty smell and can die within minutes of consuming it. And Cawthron report states, the occurrence of benthic cyanobacteria in the Waimea River is not likely to be affected by changes in minimum flows over the 0.5 to 1 metre per second range. So in other words, this dam isn't going to stop the outbreaks of that, and I think that's one of the key criteria of improved water quality. I'm not going to swim in a river that, has that algae that's going to kill my dog. I'm saying this conclusion is consistent with experience with the Maitai Dam, where, as Councillor Laurie has told us, we see still problems with this toxic algae. As for the dam itself, whenever in history has a dam resulted in improved environmental outcomes? And I'm beside myself at the thought of a beautiful river like the Lee River getting degraded, and there will be some impact on it. Others of you might support the dam because you've listened to the scaremongering that jobs will be lost, or the economy will collapse, and the Waimea Plains will become a desert. The old dog whistle of jobs will be lost has been blown in Nelson for decades and is often used to justify sunshine wages. It's time we all recognise this catch cry as the scaremongering it is. I want to relate, some of you know I was very critical of Nelson Airport operations some time ago, and 3 or 4 years ago I rang the chairman of Nelson Airport and I said, why are your landing charges the lowest in all of Australasia? Why don't you put your charges up to being where they should be? And he said, we can't do that. Air New Zealand will stop flying here and they'll take their maintenance facility away and jobs will be lost. So what's happened? Fortunately, we've got a new CEO who knows his stuff. Landing charges have gone up. There's more flights than ever into Nelson. There's cheaper airfares than ever. More jobs than ever there. In fact, Air New Zealand's increased the planes coming. But we hear this catch cry, jobs will be lost all the time. I'd like to also remind you all of a passage from the NZIER report on the benefits to Nelson City of the dam. This is quote straight out of the report. This is here. Contributions towards the dam would require increases in rating demands and would need to be weighed against other demands for rate increases. The prospect of GDP gain is a benefit for NCC, but the basis for supporting the dam is more in the beneficial services it directly supplies the city. Many more activities could claim to raise regional GDP that could be subsidised by NCC, and to support them on that basis alone opens NCC to substantial risk of over-optimism. Now, you need to remember that statement's from an organisation which was being paid to write a report in support of the economic case for building the dam. Instead, they say that there are probably better things NCC could spend its rates income on. And I think that's really telling that they put that paragraph in. I thought it's quite extraordinary. So they obviously were paid to write a report on demonstrating the economic benefits. They felt they need to put in a paragraph saying there are probably better things you can spend your money on. I have to admit to being very sceptical when Nelson City decided to participate in the LGNZ Excellence in Local Government program. Now that the first report reviewing NCC performance is out, I've changed my mind and couldn't agree more with the reviewers when they say, however, the council's budget priorities are not clear. For example, some staff and councillors appear to believe that it is acceptable to increase rates to beyond the affordable level for ratepayers on a fixed income such as a pension. I'm looking forward to seeing how you all vote on this, as it will provide a good idea of just who LGNZ is talking about when they say that some of you feel it is okay to increase rates beyond the affordable level. This project is a political tar baby. There is little doubt that the dam will cost some TDC councillors their seats at the next election. Those of you who embrace this project need to weigh up the political risk to yourselves, especially when this project turns septic, as it inevitably will.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. Any questions for Mr. Cross? That's a very clear submission. Thank you, Mr. Cross, for coming in. Our next submitter is Mr. Trevor Riley, and I'll invite Mr. Riley to join the meeting. Welcome, Mr. Riley. Thank you. I think that microphone's still on, so you don't need to do anything there. It's all right. Now, Mr. Riley, everyone's been allowed sort of 5 minutes. I've managed that last submission was somewhat over that. How are you placed? Are you going to be 5 minutes?
I've got a speaking to the submission. We'll see how far we can get through with that, but I'd like to cover the maps.
All right.
A short way in, so that we can grasp what the whole thing's about.
All right. Well, I'll keep an eye on the time, and I'll let you know how we're going. Thank you.
I don't know how we can cover 5 years of malpractice in 5 minutes. Thank you.
Mr. Riley, have you got any other material that you need to be handed out? Are there any submissions that you need to, additional papers that you want councillors to have? No. Well, we've got this. That's fine. We've got that. All right.
That much paperwork that
Mr. Riley, if it's helpful to you, I could give you some time to get your papers organised and move on to the next submitter if you like.
no, I think they're okay.
You're all set now? Okay, thank you.
Right. Thank you in advance, Mayor and Councillors, for considering this submission. In TDC Newsline 412, 17th of December, Mayor Kempthorne's message says that not all information published by dam opponents is accurate. He says, if you have any questions or concern, get in touch with council or visit their website. This submission is all about inaccurate information. Inaccurate information which had its genesis before any TDC ratepayer knew anything of a TDC dam. This inaccurate information dates back to when the last of many proposed sites was actually selected. Options then were very limited. Now, firstly, a thing about maps. That's a page of the Q map, meaning 1 to 250,000. So it covers from Rabbit Island to the Wairau Valley. And so no matter how many times you magnify that, you're still going to get, you need a microscope to see it, but you won't get any more detailed information than what's there, and you can magnify as many times as you want to, it'll still be just a Q map with no information on it. This is the full size of the 1 to 50,000 map, part of the Red River Valley, and that is at 1 to 50,000. But it's still pretty hard to see the information on that. So that's, the question is, why didn't they use Dr. Johnson's, well, it was Mr. Johnson in those days, his map of the Red Hills. It had everything on that they needed, but they didn't use it, and that's the whole question of this submission. Right, back to this. The words used in this submission are words that have never been used in TDC supplied material. Central arc terrains, vertical bedding plains, volcanic sands, capels terrains, scree and scree flows, drains, and add an extra word in there called earth flows. All words central to the situation we have here. Earthquakes, dam failure and fault lines are not part of the submission, just scree and scree flows from the massive landslides, and in this case they're
Excuse me, Mr. Riley, if you're intending to read all of what's here, that's going to take a very long time.
Yep.
So what I'm going to suggest you do is that councillors have got this and they will read this.
Yes.
So if you can highlight just your key points that you want to make from this, because I know how long it takes to read something like this, and we just won't be able to fit all of this in this morning.
Well, can I go for a couple of pages, please?
Yes, please. Thank you. But we will read it.
Right,
Thank you.
Right, so this scree problem, which is central to your own problems, occurs in many other reservoirs. Dr. Mike Johnson's own words were reconfirmed at Brightwater on the 17th of November. His words, it's very unstable up there, and there's several witnesses to that. Instability means scree. Scree means many reservoirs are quickly doomed. Unimaginably quickly will be here in the proposed Lee Valley Reservoir. TD's experts repeatedly prophesise a 100-year lifespan of the dam. It's a fairy tale stuff, all just fantasy land material. Your council, with its own scree problems, has an absolute duty to ensure that your problems are not foisted exponentially on the TDC ratepayers. Please do not fund this TDC's malpractice. There are 4 fundamental malpractice factors being addressed here, surfacing in the dam's consent process, but as is obvious from the map drafting dates, they were formulated years before. Firstly, the presenter's statement that there are no indications of large active landslides in the dam vicinity or in the reservoir area. The word landslides is generic, so it covers many things, but here in these mappings it covers rotational slumping and earth flows. Secondly, the fabricated map, map 1 here, this one, with the so-called geological experts' evidence attached, is of a completely different site. So he's talking about 10 k's upstream. Well, the only 10 k's upstream is right across there in the opposite direction. So that map has to be looked at after you consider this map, because this map, although it's numbered 5 here, it was drawn up a month before that one. Right, so thirdly, the fabricated landslide map, that's this one, it does not show the massive active landslides draining scree directly into the reservoir and the landslide area. Now, on the application for the dam was for the dam, for the Lee River and its tributaries. If you look at that map 5, there are no other tributaries registered in it. Everything's been stripped off, as you'll see later on in the submissions as to why they've done it. And if you look at the waterfall arm there, you'll see that they've foreshortened all of the landslides so that they diminish in size on the mapping. Right. Fourthly, the presenter reconfirmed to commissioners that in relation to the underlying geology of the reservoir site, he did not see any features that give him concern. Any one of these, if stated truthfully, would have disqualified the granting of resource consent. But we have 4 total untruths and the dam gets its resource consent. With so many innocent TDC ratepayers being the ones ultimately responsible for repaying TDC debt, then it's a hellish thing that they're in prospect for. Firstly, a little geology. In the early years, the seabed between Golden Bay, Tasman Bay and Taranaki was dry land. The rivers like Ariri, Takaka, Motueka and Waimea ran all through the uplifted land to exit in the northwest of the Tasman Sea. As the land slowly subsequently sank, so the scree infills, then the river mouth bars, slowly backed their way upstream. But the alluvial drains within the deposit scree still persisted. Today,
This is evident in the artesian freshwater upwellings way out to sea off these river mouths. Even the Mayor Kempthorne confirmed to me the existence of these vents in Tasman Bay, Motueka. Others are on the nautical charts. Today, the scree infill of the Waimea Plains foreshores depths greater than the adjacent mountains are high. In the adjacent geomap, that's the 30 attachment to one you've got on 20th November, shows these alluvia fill the ascending V Valley Formation all the way up to the Nelson Lakes. Saltwater intrusions never push up against gravity. Gravity is a controlling feature of everything in these things, gravity and water. So it never pushes above sea level. So as I understand it, the TDC salt levels have been registered at the merest touch of salt, whereas the
Mr. Riley, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to interrupt because we're now sort of 10 minutes into a 10-minute patch here, and we are not going to be able to have you read all of what is here.
Right.
What I'm going to propose that we do is that your notes will be attached to the minutes of the meeting. They will be there, so they will be able to be read. So what I might suggest is that you've communicated with Council on many occasions, and I thank you for that, and provided a wealth of information that has been here and been made available. So what I would suggest is we just pause now and see if we've got any questions from councillors for you. Do we have any questions for Mr. Riley on his Councillor Laurie?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Riley. This issue of saltwater intrusion gets people really concerned, and what you had to say just before I found very interesting. Can you just tell me a bit more about it? You're saying that gravity stops saltwater from getting very far up rivers. Is that what you're saying?
Well, all geology depends on the civic gravity of the material, whether it's rocks. So everything gets, if it's heated up and settles down, you'll have the denser stuff is way down the bottom, the lighter stuff, so you come up from the salt rocks to the continental rocks, and then on up through things like salt water and fresh water. In front of our place we can see we got freshwater springs around the corner, and you can tell the tide by the skim of water on the surface. Now if you go 200 miles off the Amazon River mouth, you'll find that you can drink the water there. So it takes a long time to actually dilute fresh water down with salt. And so you've got this pressure head coming from all the way up the Nelson Lakes, coming down and squashing, and so it'll drain out on the foreshore of the Tasman Bay there, and you won't see it because it's just more water. But the thing is, the salt water can't sort of climb its way up against gravity because there's a head of water coming all the way from the Nelson Lakes down, pushing things down.
Sorry, through the chair. But I would have thought if it was going into the aquifer, it would be going down.
Well, it finds its own level. And so, yeah, it depends how deep you want to go.
So you don't think salt water is going to get into the aquifer?
It might get in the aquifers down near the foreshore. But if you go further up, there's a constant flow of water coming through the aquifers all the time, pushing it down.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Your Worship. I haven't had the pleasure of hearing you before. I'm interested to know, have you got a professional background in geology?
We've got lots of books at home, and everything here is quoted from books. You'll find the references to my earlier one all about the earth flows.
Yep.
And if you collect books and one of my biggest source was written by 123 GNS scientists, and there's Continent on the Move, and it's all there. You don't need to.
I applaud your good homework.
Thank you. Any further questions? Mr. Riley, thank you for coming in to see us. If is there material there, additional material that you want the councillors to be aware of, then I'm going to ask the governance advisor who is outside the door, hopefully still there and can hear me, or somebody to my side will sort that out, and they will make sure that they collect the papers that are necessary.
I don't know how I'm going to get on presenting this to the TDC, but they might stop.
All right,
me.
well, thank you for the work that you've put into this, and I hope you understand that I can't take, it's probably in about an hour-long presentation, and I can't fit that into today's hearing. Thank you very much. All right, I'll just let you get packed up there. And then our next submission will be from Mrs. Jackie McNay. Welcome, Mrs McNay.
Thank you very much, Your Worship the Mayor, and good morning councillors, and thank you for the opportunity of presenting today on the Waimea Dam. I'm presenting this submission in my personal capacity, but I do so influenced as my role as a planner and resource management consultant in the region, and I have a wide-ranging client base of rural and urban clients involved in this issue, and also you'll be aware that I'm a member of the Community Water Solutions Advisory Group, and I've presented on that prior to today to you. You've got my written submission. I don't intend to go through that. We're all well aware of the Nelson City water supply supplied to Nelson South from the Richmond supply for the Nelson South urban and the Wakatū industrial estate area, and that's one of the reasons, but not the only, one of the reasons why I support the contribution to the dam. I want to stress that the Waimea Dam is a long-term solution for water augmentation for both the rural and urban areas. It addresses regional resilience in the water supply for current and future generations. And I think we're often bandied about that people of my age group and perhaps older, that we're seen as quite a selfish generation in terms of what we're using of resources, and I think it's beholden on us to ensure that as we use resources, we build into those resources and invest in those resources for resilience, for obviously our future as the current generation, but also future generations for their future in this fabulous region. And one move on to another issue as to the need. I don't need to stress too much climate change. I think we're all very well aware of it. And a previous speaker noted that as well, and noted the higher rainfall that we're going to get, and that's absolutely acknowledged. What also needs to absolutely be acknowledged, we're going to have higher rainfall, and we're going to have more frequent and more severe droughts, and no averaging will diminish the effects of either the storms and the very heavy rainfall and the impacts on our stormwater networks, nor any averaging of that rainfall help when we are in drought. It was only, a few weeks ago we thought, is it ever going to stop raining? Is it ever going to stop raining? And now we are into rationing on the Waimea Plains. So you can't average it out and say we've got a higher rainfall, we're all going to be okay. Let's don't worry about it. That's not how climate change works. You can't average. There are going to be more extremes at both ends of the continuum. We know we need to secure the water supply to sustain existing rural and production, and water supply to our urban areas who rely on the wells on the Waimea Plains. We need to also provide for growth, and this cannot sustainably be achieved without major risks of severe rationing during drought, and those risks are with the existing production and with the existing urban supplies. The rationing that we've got is not just on the productive supply, rationing is applying in Richmond, as I'm sure you're aware. The dam is a regional issue, and it saddens me that we don't see, or sometimes we don't see, how inextricably town and country are linked. We are so fortunate in this region, the diversity of our area and the diversity of rural productivity that has cushioned us through so many events over many, many decades. And we do rely, and I don't apologise for using jobs, we do all rely, no matter what our businesses are, rely on rural production. I know I do, and my clients are both urban and rural, but many of them directly and indirectly are supported by our diverse rural base that we have. It supports our employment, it supports infrastructure, transport, the airport and the port. I'd like to highlight that if the Waimea Plains water supply is not secured, what are those impacts on the region? Perhaps just take one example. What's the impact on the port? A drop in exports, what does that mean? That means a significant reduction in the dividend to Nelson and Tasman councils. So there's less money available for projects and debt reduction. So moving away from the why do we need it, the council funding proposal that you've put out, I support the $5 million contribution as fair and reasonable for the benefits received. My preference, though, is that the Nelson City Council does not provide this as a grant. I wish to see Nelson City Council as a shareholder, and I wish to see Nelson City Council having representation, sitting around the table for the dam company. This will allow input into future decision making and will protect water supply options for Nelson City Council. The dam is going to provide a lot of options, and I think that the decision or the recommendation to go with a grant will foreclose opportunities for the Nelson City water supply, and I want you to be around the table to keep options open. I'm not saying that you shouldn't invest further in the water supplies you have here, or that you should take the water from the enhanced supply. I simply think you need to be at the table so none of those options are foreclosed and you're part of that regional decision making for this regional facility that's there for the benefit of all of us and this generation and the future generations, and you need to be a shareholder to protect those interests. One final point that I often hear is that we are being asked as ratepayers to pay for rural production, and why should you do that? We're not being asked to pay for rural production, we're being asked to pay for what has been calculated as the fair and reasonable proportion to secure the supply to Nelson South, urban and industrial areas, for the environmental component of it, for the Waimea River. For the rural production component, that is going to come from, or that is what is being consulted on, and they will have consulting with their members to raise that funding. So this isn't the last step. If that funding can't be raised for their fair share of the financing of the dam, there will be more discussions to happen, and I don't believe the dam will proceed in that case in its current form. So I don't agree that that's the question that's been asked of you in terms of the $5 million not being asked to pay for the rural production component of it. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Any questions for Mrs McNay? Councillor Courtney.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Jackie, for your presentation. Very clear. Jackie, I want you to develop for me a little bit, please, the shareholding concept as opposed to a grant or a gift. I'd like you to develop that a little, because there are concerns if we went down that road, there would be ongoing liabilities and costs connected to that. So if you just develop that a little bit for me, would help me.
Yes, it does expose the council to ongoing liabilities and costs. It also exposes the council to ongoing benefits and opportunities, and it's both of those issues. So by going with the grant, I accept, yes, you close the door on those ongoing costs and liabilities, but I'm not happy with you closing the door on the opportunities for Nelson City, and therefore taking an arbitrary line on Champion Road as to where is the best place to deliver water. That Nelson should deliver to the middle of Champion Road and Richmond delivers to the middle from their side. I think that's quite silly. I think it's a regional issue and a regional approach. You need to be a shareholder.
Any further questions? No further questions. Thank you. That was a very clear submission. Mrs McNay, thank you for taking the time to come and speak with us. Councillors, our next submission is from Mrs Leslie Dawson. I'll invite Mrs Dawson to join the meeting. Good morning. The microphone's on. I think, Mrs Dawson, I can see the light, so you're all good to go. Thank you.
Mayor, councillors, thank you for allowing me to make a submission. I am a Nelson City ratepayer.
Mrs Dawson, I might just get you to pull that microphone a little closer to you, or perhaps you come a little bit closer to the microphone. That might work.
Talk a bit
Thank
more.
you.
Is
Thank
that
you.
better?
That's much
Sorry.
better. Thank you.
Councillors, I am a Nelson City ratepayer and soon to live in the Nelson City. I am here basically. I have two sons that are here, one who's recently come from Wellington, and he has sold a house in Wellington. It's very, very difficult to buy houses here. The houses are too expensive, and more than that, the rates and the water charges are more expensive than many other areas in New Zealand. And I think that this needs to be in the back of our minds, that if we want our children, our grandchildren, our families to live here, then we have to make it an affordable place for families. And I think this dam and the Tasman District Council thinking that they'll spend the amount of money they're talking about does not augur well for the future of this region for families. So I oppose Nelson City Council committing any funds to the Lee Valley Waimea Dam. I wrote 4 things in my submission which I'd like to expand on. The first is that Nelson doesn't need the water from this irrigation scheme. Nelson City pumpage data shows a decreasing usage and trend. This trend should be acknowledged by this council. Tasman District Council has also recorded a reduced overall pumpage, even though the population has increased significantly. Should TDC decide no longer to supply water to consumers, that's in the Nelson South residential area and the Wakatua industrial estate, etc., as mentioned by the previous speaker, then this would be very beneficial to Nelson ratepayers due to the very high cost of TDC water. Nelson, like Tasman, has considerable loss of pumped water by leakage from the current system. Reducing this loss would be a much better use of ratepayers' money in the long term. Obviously, for NCC to get any water from the Lee Valley Dam, they'd have to spend millions on infrastructure. The proposed $5 million contribution would not alone make any more water available to Nelson City. To get this water into the Nelson system, it would require further expenditure of tens of millions of dollars on infrastructure. I acknowledge that there's a significant expenditure required to improve the quality of the Maitai reservoir water, but this needs to be addressed regardless of the Lee Valley Dam. I believe that funding would effectively be a subsidy for the irrigation industry, and Nelson should not be subsidising any businesses. The spin-off benefits for Nelson are economic speculation. The economic reports are flawed in equating allocation cuts with pumpage or usage cuts. I have actually brought a form along to show you this, the data, which perhaps I should have got copied, listening to previous speakers who didn't agree with it.
Mrs. Dawson, what we'll do is we will get it copied so that it can be circulated to councillors.
Thank you. Pumpage data shows zonal water usage is not reduced during periods of restrictions. Hence, there's no loss in production. And as everybody here knows, we're sitting on one of the biggest aquifers, unconfined aquifers in New Zealand. And there's plenty of water that can be pumped out of it. And the dam is not a solution in any way. As well as that, I've given to you, which I think that you've probably had copied off this sheet, a false funding model which is attached to my submission has been used to generate inflated costs to TDC ratepayers. This consultative document was produced for a TDC meeting on the 19th of October 2017. It gives TDC urban supply as 23.5% of the dam capacity, when according to TDC information from the TDC website, it is only 9.9%. Richard Kirby, in an email to Murray Dawson, dated the 20th of October 2017, acknowledged this error, but said, so this is a quote, "Council was aware that reducing its commitment would not have achieved the long-term outcomes that are being achieved in the current proposal. That is, TDC requires a greater than 50% share of DAMCO. for this to proceed. This is also stated in the email. If Council decided to reduce commitment, firstly, there is no one else to take up that commitment, and secondly, it would remove Council's ability to control the ownership and the management of the dam. This model should not be supported by Nelson City Council. I also agree that I've heard rumours of squabbling between two councils about who gets water and how much you pay for it, and I think it's very counterproductive to producing a properly managed water system for the region. The water issue is neither urgent nor dire in spite of all the propaganda around this issue. A regional water authority should be established as soon as possible. A final submission which was made by a previous speaker is that Nelson City Council have publicly excluded workshops with WIL members present. Here, information is given but is not able to be challenged or even listened to by the ratepayers. I hope that NCC and TDC are not falling into the same category as the Mangawai Heads fiasco. Here, the Auditor-General included this in his summary report to the Kaipara District Council, and I quote, KDC's decision-making processes were also poor throughout the entire 16 years of the wastewater project. KDC relied too heavily on its professional advisors and had a practice of receiving briefings and effectively making decisions in informal workshops. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Dawson. Mrs. Dawson, you made reference to an email from Mr. Kirby to Mr. Dawson.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible to get a copy of that email?
I have that email here.
With you as well, so we've got to have that copied as well. The governance advisors will sort that out when we're finished. Any questions for Mrs. Dawson?
So just this sheet that I was going to hand around, which I did last night, as you may know or may not know, the council uses a trigger in a place not down by the Appleby Bridge. If they were using a trigger down by the Appleby Bridge, then we wouldn't be not doing handheld hosing at the moment. So there is an issue about where the trigger is. And the other thing is that the water is completely over-allocated. So when they say, as the woman before me said, that you're an irrigator and you need to stop watering, in fact the pumpage figures show that the irrigators don't decrease their use of water, which is what this sheet
All right, thank you.
This is showing, which I'm hoping you can read. So it's for the Delta Zone and for the Waimea East Irrigator Company, and it shows on certain dates when they were told that there were shortages of water and that they needed to desist. There's no desisting whatsoever, and in fact there's plenty of water in the upper aquifer for them to carry on pumping.
All right, thank you. Time for one question. I think it was Councillor Courtney.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Leslie. You presented very well, Leslie. Thank you for that. I need you to repeat again the last sentence or two of your submission. I didn't get it clearly enough, and I'd like to read it slowly, the last couple of sentences.
It was just about KDC, which you may know at Mangawhai Heads up Auckland Way, where they've spent a huge amount of money going to build a wastewater project that hasn't been built, and the money's just sunk cost and it's disappeared.
Quoted someone?
Yes, my submission, which isn't the same as what you've got,
Yeah.
I'm quite happy for you to copy it. The Auditor General, I quoted.
Yes, that's what I wanted. I want you to repeat that, what he said.
The Auditor General included this in his summary report to the Kaipara District Council. That's KDC. KDC's decision-making processes were also poor throughout the entire 16 years of the wastewater project. KDC relied too heavily on its professional advisors and had a practice of receiving briefings and effectively making decisions in informal workshops. My understanding is that if you have an informal workshop, that you are not allowed to make decisions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. There's no further questions. Thank you. Councillors, you're meant to be having a morning tea break, or you're meant to have had it by now and be back here. It was a very tight schedule that we've had put together for us today, and I did express some concern about that yesterday, but hopefully it was going to be in order. So you're going to be able to have a 5-minute break, and then what I'm going to do today, because I'm aware that many of us have got commitments that follow on straight after this, and we're going to be under a fair bit of time pressure, is that we will take a 5-minute break. I don't normally our protocol is that you don't bring cups of tea and your morning tea biscuit back to the table, but for time efficiency versus standing orders, you can bring your biscuit back to the table if you need to, and we're going to start again in 5 minutes. So it's a quick out the door for the necessary break, and if you need a cup of coffee today, it's going to have to be an instant. Right, so we'll start again at 10 past. We'll resume the meeting, and I will invite our next submitter, Mr. Graham O'Brien, to join the meeting. Good morning, Mr. O'Brien.
Good morning, Mayor, councillors. Am I good to go, Mayor?
Yes, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. My submission today is not on whether the Nelson City Council should contribute to the dam or not, as I do not feel that as a ratepayer I have been given enough information, or that the information has been presented in a way that allows me to make a decision. I have been given no chance to hear the information presented to this council, or the debate that has formed a consensus of the opinion that will be presented in the sanitised reenactment for public display, which we will be allowed to see. It is my opinion that this council has deliberately restricted my democratic right to be informed, and what we will witness could be best described as a democratic farce. I do not expect to be given the opportunity to question directly the experts or the staff, but I do expect and feel that it is my democratic right to hear the questions that councillors have put to these people and genuine debate on the subject, in the hope that you will have the same questions that I have, and that the answers will inform me and allay any concerns. I say that Council has deliberately restricted my democratic right, as Council has refused to allow the public to attend or supply much of the information from the 5 workshops that have taken place. The notes from these workshops were heavily redacted and would have been next to useless to base an opinion on, as they are never detailed enough anyway. Only video footage would supply the information needed to have an educated opinion. Also, no attendance lists were included in the information supplied. CEO David Hammond was queried on this rather unusual situation and stated that attendance records were not being kept. Information was refused to be supplied in order to enable Council to carry on without prejudice or disadvantaged negotiations. So, Nelson Council is receiving information that decisions will be based on to spend $5 million of Nelson ratepayers' money, and not only is crucial information unavailable for the people to see, but ratepayers are denied even knowing who is presenting it. For those elected representatives and staff who are not familiar with or deliberately choose to ignore what the Ombudsman says about council workshops, I'd like to quote, "Agencies should be aware that holding workshops can create a perception that an issue has been predetermined when it is subsequently brought to an open meeting for deliberation and decision. People have high expectations that local government agencies will conduct their business in an open and transparent manner, and they are likely to be suspicious and unhappy if agencies make excessive use of closed workshops to discuss issues. Agencies should ensure accurate records are kept of workshops. This will help them to comply with the Public Records Act 2005 requirement to create and maintain full and accurate records of their affairs in accordance with normal, prudent business practice." I also take issue with Mayor Rees's statement yesterday before the public was ejected from the LTB workshop on the flimsiest of reasons. Madam Mayor did state, "Do you not trust us?" Well, it may come as some surprise to you that democracy is not based on trust, it is based on participation and transparency of process, both of which I believe is severely lacking from this so-called consultation. And you've heard my feelings on the process at the city amenity debacle. And by the way, I'm still waiting for my apology from Council in regards to Ms Barton, your consultants and lawyers' comments concerning my unpaid, time-consuming research and information that I presented and that they said was incorrect. And when Mayor Rees also said, "Do we not trust Council staff?" well, I point to the city amenity bylaw debacle as a perfect example of why the answer is no, we do not. With good reason on the issue of accurate and unbiased information being presented and our democratic rights being upheld. Mayor Rees stated on Nelson Weekly Facebook page on the Facebook page. In the long-term plan, a proposal was included to allow headroom for debt associated with a possible contribution to align with construction should the dam go ahead. The proposal was fully consulted on. As details in the long-term plan about the Nelson's contributions were a bit vague, I don't think the people of Nelson realised the term headroom in fact meant $5 million. It did not raise many submissions. In fact, only 21 submissions were received, 12 were against, the 6 in favour were from corporate entities, and 3 focused on other issues about the dam. Is this really the Mayor's definition of fully consulted on? The only educated opinion I have heard on the dam is from Peter Fraser, who is on record as saying it is stupidity on a stick, which I think is a good phrase to use not only for the dam, but also for the process to date. Thank you for at least allowing me my democratic right to have my say, although I suspect that the thought of the next elections, less than 18 months away, will have more influence on your decisions than any of the submissions after all the pro-dam propaganda that you have been subjected to and kept from the ratepayers in the previous 5 secret meetings, workshops. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. Any questions for Mr. O'Brien?
Thanks very much.
No questions. Thank you, Mr. O'Brien, for coming in to present today. Our next submission is from Mr. John Palmer on behalf of Mr. Murray King. Welcome, Mr. Palmer. Just whenever you're, yes, if you press it on, good to go. Thank you.
Mayor Rachel, councillors, good morning. The submission from Waimea Irrigators that you have, I propose to have taken as read, and I only really want to make a few very brief comments about what I think the process today really is. The process is about, is water a regional issue or not? Should water in a management sense be treated as a regional issue? And certainly my personal view and the view of Waimea Irrigators is it must be, and whether that is a joint water program or a merging of the councils is not for discussion today, but water is a regional issue. The questions then are, is it an important regional issue? And our strong view, it is not only important, it is critical. The question then in relation to this project is there a problem of supply? I don't propose to talk about all of the information that you have available to you, except to say as water users in both the Waimea Plains and as a shareholder and director of 2 companies inside Nelson City, where both the water on the plains and the water that we use in our facilities at Saxton Road, Nayland Road, they are critical, absolutely critical inputs. The issue then I think that's at stake today is this an opportunity and is this an opportunity with appropriate risk? The Crown funding that's available is unlikely to be repeated certainly any time in the foreseeable future. That is critical to the project. The question then is of risk. And I think that for the relatively small risk that you as the leaders of this community would take in approving this in relation to the long term, and the long term is decades, not years, that to me the opportunity to do this now is clear and compelling. I have nothing further to say.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. Any questions for Mr. Palmer? Councillor Laurie.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Palmer. One of the earlier submitters asked the question, when has damming a river ever led to better water quality? And put that out there. And proponents of the dam talk a lot about the environmental benefits that you say will come from the construction of the dam. Can you give us some examples of where rivers' environments have been improved? The environment has been improved by dams, please.
Councillor, I can't do that offhand, except that both nationally and globally, the history of damming for water is for water extraction to apply to the land, particularly in relation to irrigation, that is not taken subsequently from or supplied to the river system from which it was originally extracted. This is a different approach to that, and I think the only one close to it is probably Opua.
Sorry, probably where?
Opua.
Opua.
Okay. And I can't comment on water quality.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor McGurk.
Hey, thanks, Madam Chair, through you. Question for Mr. Palmer. Waimea Irrigators, now, what percentage or number of the people that you propose to supply have actually signed up, committed to their share?
I think the number of responses that we had to our indicative proposal, because as you're probably aware, we are in the process of forming our product disclosure statement. That has been delayed. It hasn't been delayed for any reason other than ensuring that we had all the factual information that we are legally required to have, and it has taken some time accessing that information. On the original responses, I think the number was of the order of 200. I don't actually have the figure in front of me, Councillor.
Thank you. Any further questions?
What, out of how, a potential of 200 out of a potential of
Oh,
how
the total number is far in excess of that. That would be less than half of the total available land owners.
Right, thank you.
Councillor Barker.
Oh, thank you. We've heard a lot of information today. I'm just wondering if you can tell me, would you have an idea of what proportion of irrigators in the Waimea have built their own storage ponds?
Within the zone that is prescribed under the scheme, it would be a small number, and I'm just trying to recall if I can personally recall any that within that scheme area. It is unusual, to say the least.
Councillor Delberg.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you for the presentation, John. My question would be, someone have suggested we have a water, for example, cooperative business unit, TDC, Nelson City Council, whatever format. What's your thoughts on that being feasible?
Well, I refer to my earlier comments that the idea that we should have separate water strategies and separate water businesses where you have a line down Champion Road that says there are different things on each side of the road, I think is a nonsense. So a regional approach to water and a regional operating water management framework, I would have thought, is compelling and probably urgent.
Councillor Rutledge.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. John, there's been some criticism we've heard this morning that the irrigators should be picking up more of the tab, and if it was going to benefit as much as the claimed numbers, they'd be rushing to do so. What's your response to that?
My response to that was when I got involved on behalf of Waimea Irrigators a couple of years ago, was to ensure that that we had a proposal that made the project doable. The issue for irrigators is that on the basis of the deal that we have, for some irrigators the water is quite cheap, and for other irrigators the water is quite expensive. And the issue in trying to get, in negotiating a basis for actually saying, what could we do that looked reasonably equitable over all of the beneficiaries, the irrigators, the urban users, and the wider community who benefit from the improvements to the river? What was something that was doable? Well, in any negotiation you end up with a compromise at the end, and that's what we've done. The irrigators are clearly the largest single beneficiaries from the dam. That is certain. But we should also bear in mind that probably the one fact that probably everybody can agree on, the dam in 2017 is bigger than we need. And that's a simple fact of the economics of the build, and saying this is not a 5-year project. This is hopefully a 100-year project, and we should think about the economics and the benefits over a long period of time. Is it equitable to everybody? Well, I think my job was to negotiate on behalf of the irrigators. I think that the advantage that the irrigation component brings to the viability of the scheme, and particularly the funding side, is because the irrigators have access directly or indirectly to Crown funding at concessional rates, which is, in my view, a very, very significant benefit to the region, not to either one or other council.
Councillor Courtney.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mr. Palmer. Thank you, Mr. Palmer, for your presentation. Some of the submitters today, this morning, have sort of indicated that the benefits have been overstated, dressed up to look better than they really and truly will be. And also, a consistent theme coming through, and I've got note after note here, that the information that you're putting out is flawed. It's not based on true facts. So I'd like to develop that a bit for me. First of all, the benefits. I'd like to develop those, and whether or not the information that's coming out to the public is based on has a sound basis.
Well, the benefits, as described originally in the NZIER report, I think of 2014, updated in 2017, and in the counterfactual of the costs of no dam and the work that was done by Northington Partners on that basis, all I can say is that since my involvement and the particular instruction, because I gave the instruction to Northingtons, that was to take the data that was available, the best data they could find, and tell us what the answer was. So I'm relying on professionals and their professional reputation, and I don't have an opinion. The fact that other economists disagree, all I would say is that's not unusual. But I think in relation to the benefits, if the order of magnitude was overstated, the question of the net present value being strongly positive, I don't think can be put in question. I think your second question, Councillor, was in relation to the information that we have used. The technical information we have used, again, we have, and I particularly have, relied on what I consider to be experts. I don't have a particular view, except to say that I have lived in the region for a long period of time and have personally been involved in water issues in the Waimeas on one basis or another since the 1970s. The issue of whether there is a shortage of water, critical shortage of water when it matters, and the economic impacts of that, in my view, are clear and undoubted.
I've just got one final question, Mr. Palmer, in relation to Mr. King's submission. I'm not sure if you've got that in front of you, so I will read out as a number of points on behalf of Waimea Irrigators Limited, encouraging support for the proposal, and the third one in the list is a statement that reads, avoids future inevitable challenge to consent renewals of the road intake. And I am just going to ask you a few questions around that, because I'm just wondering whether that's essentially saying if you don't fund this, we're going to take you to court, because that's how I'm reading it. And I have dealt with many proposals over the years for clients where I've had to engage with parties who have said, oh, well, pay me some money and I won't object. I'm not sure that the principle of that sits well with me. Is that what's intended here?
Certainly that's not intended. In my time, so that's at least for the last 2 years with Waimea Irrigators, that the question that you raise has not been raised with us. It may have been discussed, but certainly is not either the position or the policy of Will. I can state that emphatically. But I think the risk for the council is that when you are dealing with a whole catchment basis, the issue of consents that affect the supply and the catchment inevitably could lead to conflict. I think that was the point that was being made. I think that's the reason why I personally think that a regional water approach is imperative, because there is essentially only one major catchment supplying water for both Nelson City and Tasman District.
All right, so when I'm reading this, I shouldn't take it that, or should I take it that what I'm reading from the submission is that Waimea Irrigators Limited are potentially considering litigation against Nelson City Council if this council doesn't fund.
No, you should
Right,
consider that it is
I
not.
just wanted to clarify
you should
that.
consider that it is not contemplating, has not discussed at all taking that action.
Right, thank you. I'm glad I clarified that point, because I'm sure you can understand, having read that statement, why I may have interpreted it that way. Thank you. No further questions. Thank you for coming in today to present and answer questions. Thank you. Our next submission is from Mr. Mike Johnson, and there is a paper handout. Now, has that already been circulated? Just noted on my... It's just coming through. Thank you very much. Dr. Johnson, thank you very much for joining us, and whenever you're ready.
Right, thank you, Madam Mayor and councillors. I'm going to just talk extremely briefly. You've got the submissions I've made, one of which was directly to this council, the other one is a copy of what I submitted to TDC. The dam is a critical piece of infrastructure which gives us a chance to secure security of water supply to a significant part of this region. I use the term region here in the broadest sense because I think the boundary at Champion Road is not going to be around here forever. Nelson City also, of course, stands to benefit, and it's already been referred to by some of the other submitters, the actual increased cargo going through the port, and I think much of Nelson's prosperity is dependent on Port Nelson, and I was born in Nelson 76 years ago and lived most of my life here, so I've kept a close eye on the port amongst other things. In fact, I'm surprised Port Nelson hasn't actually become a shareholder in the proposed scheme. Now, so I'm fully, as a Nelson City ratepayer, fully in support of the city's involvement within the dam. Now, I would just like to go on to my more technical side of submissions. One of the reasons I got sent to Nelson by Geological Survey in 1970 was to actually sort out the aquifers. Now, I did that, and I spent some 15 years, more or less, as chairman of the Nelson Catchment Board's Water Committee, so we were responsible, I guess, for much of the over-allocation which went on in the plains at that time. But I would just like to point out that as far as the aquifers are concerned, that there is no surplus in those aquifers for supplying additional water, and I heard one of the submitters before talking about the unconfined aquifer. Now, if more water is taken out of that unconfined aquifer, the river will go dry. You just can't have it both ways. So I'd just like to reiterate that as far as my knowledge is concerned, and I've spent a lot of time on studying those aquifers, is that...
Dr. Johnson, sorry to interrupt. I'm just going to get you to move that microphone slightly closer. It's just they seem to run out of power after about 2 hours. I don't know why.
I put it on before, but
you have got it on. It's just they for some reason they seem to fade away during the day. I don't know why. Then
story of my life, madam.
Yes, no, it's all right.
Now, the other thing is the seismic matters. They've been raised there about the geology, and as you are well aware, I think that I have spent since 1970 studying the Waimea Flaxmore fault system and also the Alpine fault or Wairau fault in the Wairau Valley. So all I'd just like to say is that the actual seismic risk to the dam is known, and that has been designed for as part of the proposal to actually build a dam, and a rock-filled type dam, of course, is a very solid structure, and as I was quoted in the paper the other night, is that they're actually very hard to get rid of. So that just concludes what I have to say, and I'm more than happy to answer questions should anyone feel like asking them.
Thank you. Any questions for Dr. Johnson? Councillor Laurie.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Dr. Johnson. In a nutshell, how did the TDC get its allocation of water so wrong?
You mean it goes back to the Nelson Catchment Board days? Well, one, I guess there's, we were learning about how much water there was in the various aquifers at the time. The other thing which was going on was the actual riverbed was being lowered as a flood protection measure to actually remove gravel, and in doing that lowers the water table within the lower confined aquifers, so that lessens it. And that was known at the time. It was just considered that flood protection was the lesser of the two evils than reducing water, but of course the demand for water has now increased, and again we can't have it both ways. That either you build bigger stop banks to prevent flooding, let the riverbed build up and build bigger stop banks, or else you stick with the present management.
So through the chair, what's your response to an earlier submitter who said we're in the situation because the powers that be at the time over allocated water? The answer is to adjust the allocation of water, to take responsibility for that and reduce the amount of water people are allocated. What's your response to that idea?
Well, you can reduce the amount of water which people take, but then that's going to have a detrimental, in my opinion, outcome of reducing production from what are extremely valuable soils, coupled with a good climate.
And my last question to the Chair, because you are an expert, what about these concerns about nitrate ingress into the aquifer if we get more horticulture on the Waimea Plains as a result of the dam?
If you've got horticulture, then the nitrate level shouldn't increase. Nitrate levels have been high in parts of the plains for some time. We're not entirely sure why. Certainly it was prior to very intensive land use. I do know, though, without mentioning any names, that some individuals to actually spread fertiliser on their land did actually put some fertiliser down a few of the wells and then pumped it back out again, which of course doesn't help. But there is a area in the eastern Waimea Plains where there is a high nitrate level. So I can't really comment any more than that.
Thank you. Councillor Courtney.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mike. I'm so pleased you're here. Thank you for your submission. Very, very timely. I was surprised earlier, and just comment on this if you wouldn't mind, a submitter earlier on said here the water from the dam going down the river would not find its way into the aquifers. And I sort of thought to myself, as I was thinking about what I'd ask you in relation to this, I found it and I've written that down. It won't replenish the aquifers, says the submitter this morning. Now you know, I really want to know what you consider your expert opinion is on that, because that's what the submitter said. It won't find its way into the aquifers.
Right, well here when they're saying aquifers, I assume they were talking about both the unconfined aquifer, which is the one immediately below the surface of the plains, and then we have two major confined aquifers at depth underneath the plains. Now for recharge for those, the confined aquifers, you really do need a good flood to go down the river to stir up the riverbed and let the infiltration in. Some water will go in, but much of the recharge probably occurs at times of high flows. Now, as far as the unconfined aquifer is concerned, if the river level comes up, then the water will flood back into the unconfined aquifer. It's just like having a bath, filling it up with boulders, and at one end and the other bit clear. If you raise the level in the clear bit, or where there are no boulders, then that water will flow through into where the boulders are and the water table will come up. So putting it another way, if the river drops, then the amount of water which is available within the unconfined aquifer diminishes, and eventually, if it's decided for environmental reasons that no more takes it to be from the river because of the its low flow or going dry, then the water is not going to be available for irrigation.
Councillor Barker, were you on my list? Yes, I thought you were. You're next up. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. One of the earlier submitters had 90 pages of information about aquifers and structures in the land, and in those 90 pages, one of the themes he was putting across was that there is risk of gravel falling into behind the dam because of the geological nature of that area where the dam is proposed to be. What's your view on that?
Well, we know what gravel's coming down the rivers at the moment, and it's certainly not great because there's insufficient supply, the demand for aggregate, for example, at the present day, and that's been the case for a decade or more. If there's a major earthquake, then there will certainly be widespread instability in the catchments, and that will invariably get into the dam. Now, whether that's controllable or not, I think if it's a relatively small amount, then that can be controlled. You can take the material back out again. But I would stress that the amount of material which will be coming down that river will be so great, whether the dam is there or not, that that will be not what people will be worrying about.
Thanks. Now, the only other point, the difference between the very deep aquifers and the what you call the unconfined one is at the top.
The unconfined at the top, yes.
Submitters have said that that there is the ability to pump out as much as you want, and do you think they're talking about the very deep aquifers when they say that?
Well, the submitter, which was about 4 or 5 before me, was talking about the unconfined aquifer. Now, the confined aquifers are just like big pipes full of boulders, so there's a limit there. The lower confined aquifer is we don't know quite where that goes out beyond the coast, But with the upper confined aquifer, that is salt contaminated underneath Rabbit Island. So you've got a salt there, so you're again governed by how much you can take out. And that same argument, of course, applies to the unconfined aquifer. If you've got salt out one side, you start pumping too much, that salt comes in. And once you get salt into an aquifer, particularly a confined aquifer, then it's very hard to get rid of it.
And just for clarification then, if that pumping out from the deep aquifer was upland, way up, there's still the risk of salt intrusion at the bottom?
If you're taking out more than actually can flow down, and because you've got a pressure which is keeping the salt water at bay, so to speak.
Yep. Thank you.
But the aquifer, the unconfined aquifer, of course, gets very narrow and thinner as you go inland. It's not a uniform pipe. It's a pipe which starts off at this thickness, which thins up to virtually nothing.
Councillor McGurk.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Barker. One of the questions I was going to ask. Just interested in your report, you talk about the dam is probably at greater risk from a shaking on the Alpine fault. That's where you see the more significant risk.
Well, the Alpine fault in the Wairau Valley, sometimes called the Wairau fault, is more likely to move than one of the local faults here. But that does not preclude, of course, one of the local faults moving today. But the chances are much higher that it'll be the Alpine fault in the Wairau Valley, which is still only 35 kilometres from us here.
Yeah. So you talk about shaking. Is that a vertical or a horizontal shift or a combination of both? Or?
Well, the earthquakes they produce is somewhat different because the faults are not parallel, and the direction of stress across the plate boundary on the Alpine fault or Wairau fault, it comes in obliquely, so it tends to slide sideways. Yeah. And that can end up with a rupture. If that fault moves, then the expectation would it would rupture over 100 kilometres in length, that sort of order. And that would produce a very large earthquake. The ones here, the actual stress is coming in more or less at right angles to the fault, and everything is being pushed up, which is why we have the mountains immediately behind us. So you're getting an earthquake which is going to direct the energy more up underneath us. But because of the pressure at right angles to the fault, the actual length of fault is unlikely to rupture along a great length, and the evidence we have from where some of these faults up here have ruptured, and we've still got the evidence preserved on, there's anything from a few kilometres to perhaps 15 kilometres length rupture, and that gives you still a nasty earthquake, but in a much smaller area.
So, how's your understanding of the Waimea Flaxmore fault system? Is that as advanced in your understanding as with the Alpine Wairau fault system?
No, it probably isn't, because much of the research in New Zealand has gone on to these horizontal type faults because they're easier to work with. This is one of the reasons you can get material to date from them, which helps you work out when earthquakes occur. But there's still been half a dozen or so trenches dug across this, the Waimea Flaxmore fault system, so we know a fair amount about it. We know what sort of earthquake they're going to produce. We don't know where an earthquake may occur, except that it's likely to be every few thousand years, and it could be on one segment of one of the faults in the Waimea Flaxmore fault system. There's half a dozen major ones and a whole host of smaller ones, so which fault's going to rupture next is anyone's guess, and whether it's going to be in Nelson City or down in Golden Downs.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson, and that's all your questions, Councillor McGurk. We could be here for hours discussing fault hazards, but just like I haven't got all day for Mr. Riley's presentation, I can't go into too much more on this one. So, Councillor Rutledge and Councillor Delberg, and I haven't known any other questions.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm happy that the doctor has answered the question around saltwater intrusion to a very high standard, and is a considerable expert in the matter.
Councillor Delberg.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. My question is really picking up on the environmental component. Some people have sort of debated about the value of that. And it's more about the river health and the sediment in the river being the challenge. So your question really is, with the river flow dropping over summer, without a dam, what is the river health effect and the sediment in the water and also the estuary health? Can you give us a wee bit of an idea on that?
Well, I'm not an ecologist, so I can't delve into that very much. All I can say is about volumes, which is releasing water from any storage facility at times of low flow is going to be extremely beneficial.
Dr. Johnson, I just want to come back to this issue of nitrates, because that's come through in many of the submissions, the concern that in looking at the effects of the dam, we then need to consider the land use and the intensification of land use. And if I understood your answer to Councillor Laurie before, you were saying that actually there has been presence of nitrates well before there was an intensification for horticultural purposes, and you don't see that horticulture is going to be a major contributor to nitrates. Can you just expand a little bit more on that topic?
Well, again, I don't want to get out of my field in this, but all I can say is that in the past we recognised that there was some high nitrates in the confined aquifer underneath the Hope area. And now, whether that was coming from existing farming use, and I can recall back in the 1970s when you took visitors up on top of the Aniseed Hill and you looked down, you had a magnificent view, but also if you look closely, there was one huge pig farm there. So that alone must have been putting nitrates down into the ground. As I said, we have evidence, which I've got no reason to, well, evidence is not quite the word, but I've got no reason to doubt the truth of it, that one way of economically spreading fertiliser around was to actually add it to your groundwater.
So there may have been some historical farming practices that we're still seeing evidence of
but
those
if
now.
we're talking about horticulture, which I think is what this land is best designed for, rather than dairying farming, if it was all converted into dairy farms, then I would suspect that that's probably not very good as far as nitrates are concerned. But again, I'm not don't want to step out of my field here.
No, that's fine. I probably am asking you to go out of your direct field of expertise. With your knowledge from being on the Nelson Catchment Board, it is quite useful for us today, just in terms of what we're looking at. Right, there's no further questions, so thank you very much for coming in to present and to answer questions. Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Our final submission today is from Mr. Wishart, and I'll invite Mr. Wishart to join us if he is here. Thank you. And I'm sorry, just one moment, I'm just getting some whispers in my ear. I'll just find out what that's about. Mr. Wishart, welcome. Just whenever you're ready, you can start. Just press the button that says, it's all right, just press the button that says talk and make sure the light's on, and then you'll be good to go. That's it.
Thank you. My submission is in the context of a person who's lived in Nelson for a few months and who's taken an interest in the Waimea Dam, I think of it as the Lee Dam, for about 4 weeks. So I really couldn't have cared less about it until I heard Wynne speak once upon a time, and I've become very interested. And I do have a background in this sort of stuff. Okay, let me know if I'm not doing it. Right, yeah. I'm just going to read this because I'm aware I'm the last speaker and you guys need to get away, so I'll read pretty fast. And it's fairly generalistic and tinged with a little bit of cynicism. As the submission stated, I supported option 2, recognising that a NCC decision on a contribution will precede the TDC decision on whether to proceed. This discussion will fill in some gaps. Fundamentally, I'm saying think seriously before you commit. After you commit, really go for it, and let's make some gold out of this. Option 2 is the more courageous option. Option 1 I see as weak and gutless, hovering around the edges. Great. Just keep me informed. But option 2, as I am envisaging it, carries some responsibility for the further gaining of public permission. I see option 2 as a way of turning the dam into a regional endeavour. If we are going to have a dam on our back door, let's all prosper. But let us first agree that a dam is necessary and it's a good thing. With option 2, NCC really has to do what TDC has failed to do, and that is to present information to the public in a manner that is easy to understand and that paints the dam as a project that will benefit everybody and not just a well-resourced few. Of course, in the current formulation of events, should NCC opt for option 2, the TDC decide to proceed, it will be tempting to regard it as a fait accompli, done and dusted, and NCC can play the role of poodle to TDC and will. The point this submission makes is that NCC should take the opportunity to educate the public and make the most of positives that the dam may offer. The danger in not doing this is that it will become a situation like the Dunedin Stadium, the Christchurch Cathedral, where a narrative of controversy and ill feeling will linger for generations. Remember, this is not like many other rural irrigation dams in New Zealand, such as the Apuha near Fairlie, and many dams in central Otago where I previously lived, where the whole community understands the need for water storage. The New Zealand economy in the 1940s and 50s, I grew up in the 50s, was built on rural water storage district electricity schemes, all built by trusted local authorities. Those days are long gone. Maniacal think bigites with the collective brain of an amoeba put an end to civic and social trust. You and other councils bear the brunt of that. Of course, it will be individual businesses that take up the mantle of turning the largesse of abundant water into the largesse of abundance for individual well-being. Perhaps if the dam precedes the claims and ideas promulgated in economic reports such as NZIER and the superb 2015 MPI report on horticultural potential, hope you've read it, could be held to account. Nelson EDA must play a role in linking current economic rhetoric to future economic outcomes and accountability. Here are some ideas or areas that you might consider using as foci for the endeavour of winning hearts and minds. It won't be easy because Tasman's failed. And your excellent document is a great start. I really thought it was well done. So I've got two areas. Area A, enable people to get their heads around several technical issues that are by nature non-linear and tricky to understand. Area B is enable people to understand the political issues around dam governance and ownership. So I'll just call them, categorise them this way. A1, do this by understanding the dynamics and contestability of water flow in a river that largely runs underground and that has variable flow from week to week, season to season, and has abstractions of water from it in different quantities at different times. This can only be understood by accepting a system of hydrological modelling that is imperfect and which itself can only be understood by experts. We need to trust these experts. I had an hour with one of them yesterday and I learned a lot. You people would profit from a similar hour with maybe the same person or someone similar. I trust experts, but they need to take us on board and keep us up with where they're at. A2, do this by understanding the dynamics and contestability of water abstractions by irrigators in an unpredictable and erratic manner according to the whims of climate, soil type and crop type. Irrigators currently use about 78% of Waimea water, and they produce some of the best food in New Zealand, more so with a reliable water supply. Thank you, irrigators. I'm one of those people who can't even grow radishes, so I really need you. But Brian Easton and others have noted the conflation of water rights and property rights in New Zealand. This is a massive issue. It will get more massive very soon. A3, do this by understanding the dynamics and contestability of reduced allocations from what they have been over many years in order to accommodate an increase in surface flow of the Waimea River. This is in turn to accommodate a 10% more viable habitat for native fish and trout, and some recreation for kids, dogs and boats. Historical total Waimea water allocations for irrigators and everyone else have been averaging around 207,000 cubes a day. It will be reduced to around 120, almost half, next year. Remember that Nelson, we use 22,000 cubes a day. So a lot of water is going on that land. There is some slack to play with, as 7 of the 9 Waimea water management zones have 61 to 84% of irrigators who have been using far less than half their allocation, in some years but not all. The problem, as everybody in this room knows, comes in dry years when 20 to 50% restrictions kick in. In a sense, then, any dam is an insurance policy for a few dry years for a few people. Let us be clear about this, but a few bad years in business, I've been in business, a few bad years is bad for everybody. Let us be clear about that. A4, do this by understanding the dynamics and contestability of deciding appropriate ecological flows. Document here, I'm into that sort of stuff. 38 ways to decide ecological flows. You can easily get it wrong. And an ecological flow is about non-human life. It's about the little things that live in water. Environmental flows are different from ecological flows. They're about us, boats and kids. Minimum flows, different again, about limits of available water. All different, all based on science that is open to interpretation and national policy. I refer to the proposed National Environmental Statement on Ecological Flows that has rather shoddily been subsumed by Objectives B of the National Policy Statement on Fresh Water. I'm sure you guys know all about that stuff. I certainly do, and left up to regions to discover. Let me know if I'm running over time, Rachel. We're on to point B now, which is enable people to understand the political issues around dam governance and ownership. The current governance model for the dam deems significant ownership by will as a major shareholder. This might be construed as unacceptable by many, including myself, despite the good intentions of will. Water is a public resource, and New Zealand is about to enter a phase of discussion around ownership of water. Like the foreshore issues some years ago, this debate will reach primeval parts. I'm going to read this slowly because this is a really important bit. The debate will reach primeval parts of our human psyche, and much blood will be spilled along the way. Will may think they will control the Lee River's stored water. Others may think differently. David Parker's suggestion when in opposition that water be charged at 1 cent per 1,000 litres is half the price that you people charge me. And it spawned a litany of lies from English, Joyce and their mates in Matter. Such ignorance and crassness at the highest level of New Zealand politics does not bode well for this ensuing water debate. The situation that has been created with the current dam model is that those affiliated with the dam will have greater property rights than those unaffiliated. This would become a critical and socially divisive issue at times of rationing and at times of property sales. To call this a community dam is just bullshit. B2. Objective B3 and Policy CA2F IAB of the National Policy Statement Fresh Water demand that water be allocated in an equitable manner for the well-being of the entire community. You have to read the guidelines to get that because it's not in the main thing. This is not the case with the current model as exemplified in the Tasman Resource Management Plan Schedule 31C with its affiliation, non-affiliation arrangement, and a legal challenge, I say this slowly, a legal challenge could ensue if this arrangement becomes operative by a dam being built. The allowance of water trading for profit from excessive allocations, which the affiliation arrangement might facilitate, and although allowed by the National Policy Statement for 2014, which after all is a child of Dr. Smith, and indeed is used currently in Canterbury, where a few fake squires and Hereford Street farmers are making a fortune from trading a public resource, $200,000 per year from some accounts I read. It's highly unjust, highly inequitable, and totally socially divisive. So what I've said there, in case you're sort of losing track, is that the affiliation, non-affiliation model is incredibly inequitable. Has to be dealt with before we get into trouble. B3, any dam built in our region must...
Excuse me, Ian, give me an idea how many more pages you've got to go.
Yeah, 2.
2? Okay.
I'll go fast.
All right. Well, and councillors, what we're going to do is we can get a copy of your notes and
Yeah.
It's fine.
I've got that much at home. Any dam built in our region must benefit everybody. Take those economic reports that you referred to as with a grain of salt, but it's obvious there's going to be some more food produced, etc., etc. I'll sort of praise here. Let's all make as much as we can. Some of Shane Jones's bros on couches might be pleased to get off their couch and get a purposeful job. The more water is needed model is based on 2 presumed drivers. Firstly, the need to reduce allocations next year. There's a can of worms based on certain takes of the National Policy Statement and public hysteria about freshwater quality. So we're to blame, but I won't go there today. It's also based on the economic growth model that more is better, that there is no such word as enough. This is underpinned by National Government's liberal immigration policies, the National Policy Statement on urban development capacity, by the special housing areas mentality. All ideas that you guys are supposed to enable. Providing a dam will guarantee Nelson Tasman has people pouring in, property developers already jumping for joy. Michael Bailey and MGJ Garden will be knighted, and ironically there'll be less land for food growing as Tasman District continues to turn itself into one big sprawling lifestyle block circus, gratis, Yankee, flotsam and jetsam, and conflation of the words controlled and discretionary with the word permitted. On a more positive note, having both councils participate in owning and operating a dam and distributing the candy floss would certainly help reverse the nonsense of creating 2 councils in the first place. In fact, 4 years of reduced wage bills by combining the councils would deliver savings of $80 million. Curiously, mysteriously, the cost of a dam. Hallelujah. So on the last bit there, Mr. Mayor. So with our sparkling new dam, we can water our plastic lawns, wash the Chrysler and the Cayenne, fill our spa pools, flush our wee away. Unlike the Melbournians who haven't been able to eat asparagus for years, we can drink the gravel-filled Waimea catchment water, which the hydrologist tells me is much nicer than the chromatic ooze of Dun Mountain, which is what we're currently drinking. And you guys can run the Mai Tai, and I got this from one of your staff yesterday. 50% higher in summer. We run it at 3,300 litres per sec. We can now run it at 450 if we drink someone else's water instead of the South Mai Tai. Less for Miriam, good for Fido, good for Sebastian. And the final bit, the uptake of option 2 entails a lot of further work, getting public understanding and public approval by both councils. If this happens and we get a true community dam, fantastic. Yes to that. If it doesn't happen, if you don't do that further work, or if the dam benefits only a few people, no. Then we will have to learn to live within our means, and that's not a bad option. After all, it is the prevailing counterfactual, which most of us are doing quite nicely, actually. Final bit. Remember that TDC themselves say there is enough water for 10 to 15 years of growth. Remember that the National Policy Statement for Fresh Water doesn't have to be fully in operation until 2030. Remember that rights for individuals and groups to control and profit from water rights and ownership will soon become the hot potato of New Zealand politics for a decade. Let's get this right. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. We will get copies of what Ian's just read out, so that will be added to the minutes. Are there any, just one or two questions, or will we take that as, read, digest? I think we're good. No, I think that's fine. Thank you for the effort that you put into your submission, and thank you for waiting to present to us. But don't depart without handing that piece of paper across to a person who's going to copy it. Thank you very much. Now, Councillor Z, as I understand it, I'll just check Pamela, there's nobody else who's... No, all right, so that is the end of... Can't go around twice, Mr Palmer.
Madam Mayor, I would like clarification on one of the councillor's questions, as to whether I gave the correct answer.
I think we are past that point. Otherwise, I open up an exchange where previous submitters say, I'd just like to add a bit more and a bit more and a bit more. So we kind of do it's the line in the sand. Councillors, this is the end of the hearings. This is the time where I ask you if you have any particular questions for the officers to follow up, any further information that you would like to be gathered so that they can incorporate that into the deliberations report. So have a think now. I'll give you just a couple of minutes just to think about anything further. So I'll start with Councillor McGurk. All right, well, in that case, is there anything that you're particularly seeking at this stage you just want to make the officers aware of? Thank you. All right, Councillor Laurie, Councillor Walker.
Just given how much is being made of the environmental benefits of the dam, I would be interested in getting some information about examples of dams that have improved the environment in New Zealand, please.
Oh. Well, you need to speak to that, Ms MacDonald. So if you've want to respond to the question.
Through the Mayor, I was just noting that our report states we've not tried to assess the environmental benefits because we're assessing a contribution to the dam from the point of Nelson City Council. So if there's an environmental impact that impacts on Nelson City residents, that we could provide you with some information on.
This takes me back to one of those conversations we had in a workshop. The river goes out into Tasman Bay. Tasman Bay is part of Nelson. I do see the two as environmentally connected, and what environmentally happens in that part of the region I think impacts on people in Nelson City. So I don't really understand why we're not looking at the environmental impacts, good or bad, of the dam when we consider whether or not we're going to give $5 million of ratepayers' money to Tasman for their dam.
Can I speak to discuss Ms MacDonald to speak to that?
Through the Mayor, we can certainly speak to impacts on Tasman Bay, and the report does talk about that, so we can look at any impacts on the bay.
Right. I think the question's been asked. We'll just make sure we're within the scope of what we can do. Is that your concern? The scope of the process that we're dealing with, but I think that there's probably maybe some general overriding issue here in relation to that matter. So I think what Councillor Laurie is asking for, on the face of it, is a very reasonable proposition, but you can go away and have a think about that a bit more, right? So we'll start on the proposition that if there are matters that councillors wish to, in their wider deliberations and thinking about this, that they seek, then we will have those come through. I would say just move on. Any other bits of information at this point, Councillor Laurie? That's all. Who else? Councillor Walker.
Thank you. Mr Ruffle may be able to help us here. I understand that some further work is being done to identify the cost of getting potentially Nelson water to urban Richmond, and I'd like to know when if that information will in fact be made available to us, and also the costing of the aquifer water to get that to our boundary. It was previously stated, quite a wide variance there of sort of 16 to 20 million, and I understand some further work is being done to fine that down a bit.
Thank you. Councillor Skinner, then Councillor Rutledge.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mine is if we're as a council contributing 5 million or what we've got in our options, what effect on that will be on our ratepayer rates-wise? And when, so timing of how that would affect when and how much?
Okay, thank you.
Is it just a financial impact?
Councillor Rutledge.
And then, sorry, and any other further costs that may be bundled into that would flow on from accepting that contribution?
We've heard a lot about the economic impact to the region, and I guess I would appreciate if we could split out what the specific economic benefits or disbenefits, depending on which view people might take, to Nelson only, not including any regional effects.
Thank you. Any other information at this stage that councillors are seeking? Councillor Ackland.
Just reminded me of the issue with what Councillor Skinner was asking for, but my particular one was I was interested to hear the point made about whether or not it's a capital contribution or an operational contribution by way of a grant rather than actually having a tangible asset. So perhaps if Nicky could just identify that specific.
Thank you. I would. There was a comment made earlier in one of the submissions. I think it was from Mrs. O'Connor, in relation to information from the Nelson Marlborough Medical Officer of Health in relation to nitrates. So I understand that, well, we may not be thinking about, and that's the issue of scope, but I am actually quite interested in that issue. So just if we could perhaps find out about that, if there is some information, that would be useful. And there was also discussion around, obviously around the NIWA projections on climate change. So if we could have some information on that in the report as well. And it goes to the rationale of whether the dam is needed or not. So we heard some different views this morning. Anything else, councillors, at this point? Councillor Courtney.
I would like, I don't want to repeat what the work we've done already, but I'd like us to have a fresh look at whether we have, if we proceed with a grant or whether we have a shareholding. If we go that way, I'd like that more closely examined, if we could please, just to sort of get our heads around that. I know you've done work on it before, but I'd just like to be refreshed on that, please.
Yes.
The Barker?
Just on that same issue, would it be possible, when considering the benefits of either of the two options, shareholding or grant, can you get a legal assessment of whether the grant with conditions would be possible to achieve a community dam situation? The grant, a conditional grant.
Could you give us some indication of what you might be thinking?
Some of the conditions might have some of the things that would protect the rights of Nelson in the future because of the fact that it's made the grant. So an assurance that Nelson City would be involved in any change of allocation or whatever.
All right, thank you. Right.
And possibly the composition of any governing body.
Governing body, right, okay, we've got that, governing body. That's fine. Anything further at this stage? All right, I think that if anything comes to mind in particular that you think when you go through, because you've got some documents that have been tabled today, when you'll have a chance to read through those, I encourage you to do that. And if from that there are other matters that you think are going to be important for the to go into the deliberations report, if you could email Miss McDonald, please, and just copy me into that email, I'd appreciate that, so we just know what's being formed up for the report. So we won't be proceeding to deliberations on this matter until February, I think that's correct. So there's quite some time to go. If the other areas that I would want in the deliberations report, just from my perspective, are And this is a little bit of a movable feast, I'd have to say. Just if information on or the positions that we are in relation to industrial users in the Wakatu estate and what their positions are. I'm conscious that there may have been some movement and communications in relation to those matters, so if we could have those included as well. All right, that concludes the hearing today. Thank you very much to all of the public that came to participate. Obviously, councillors, there are more submissions than just those that came to be heard today. So again, a reminder that it's important to have read all of the submissions, not just the ones from the people that actually do come in to talk to us. They're all given equal weight. Well, they're given, consideration, I should say, as we go through, not equal weight. And I will close the hearing and see you back here tomorrow for other events, for those of you who can make it.